The morning they read Thomas Quinn's will, Alara wore black that had faded to gray at the shoulders. She'd owned the dress for 3 years, long enough to bury a stillborn daughter, a father-in-law who drank himself mean, and now a husband who'd worked himself into the ground trying to prove something to men who'd never cared. The fabric smelled like lye soap and wood smoke, and it hung loose around her waist because she'd forgotten to eat for the better part of a week. She sat in a chair that creaked under her weight, which wasn't much these days, in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco. The lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Aldrich with ink-stained fingers, kept glancing at her like she might break apart if he spoke too loud. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, clearing his throat, "I want you to understand that I advised your husband against this. Provision, multiple times." Alara looked at him. Her eyes were the color of slate, and they didn't blink much. "Just read it." Aldrich shifted in his seat. Behind him, through a window that needed washing, she could see the main street of Collier's Bend, a town that had sprung up around cattle and copper and the kind of desperate hope that drew people west when they had nothing left to lose. Dust moved in lazy spirals between the buildings. A dog barked somewhere. Life continuing like Thomas wasn't gone, like the world gave a damn. "Very well." Aldrich adjusted his spectacles and read in a voice that tried for authority but landed somewhere near apology. "To my beloved wife, Alara May Quinn, I leave the ranch known as the Broken Spoke, consisting of 420 acres, the main house, 2 barns, livestock, and all associated properties, tools, and holdings." "There's a condition," Alara said. It wasn't a question. Aldrich's face did something complicated. "Yes." "Then get to it." He looked down at the paper like it had personally wronged him. "The inheritance is contingent upon Mrs. Quinn producing a legitimate male heir within 1 calendar year of the testator's death. Said heir must be born in lawful wedlock and survive to the age of—" He paused. 3 months. Should this condition not be met, the property shall pass to Gideon Hale, son of Harold Hale, in recognition of debts owed and considerations rendered. The words sat in the air like smoke. Alara didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't cry. She'd cried herself empty in the first 2 days after Thomas died, and there wasn't anything left for this. This was just information. A problem that needed solving, same as a broken fence or a sick horse. "Debts owed," she repeated quietly. "Your husband borrowed significantly from Harold Hale's bank to purchase additional land and cattle 2 years ago. The debt was restructured several times." "I see." "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Quinn." She stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the small room. "When does the year start?" "The date of death, September 14th. So I have until next September." "Mrs. Quinn!" "Thank you for your time, Mr. Aldrich." She walked out before he could say anything else, before pity could settle into his expression and make her want to throw something. The street was bright after the dimness of the office, and she had to squint against it. 2 women across the way saw her and immediately bent their heads together, whispering. Alara recognized them. Martha Simmons and her daughter Clara. Good Christian women who baked for church socials and smiled with their mouths closed. She walked past them without acknowledgement. Her horse, a gray mare named Smoke, waited at the hitching post with the patience of an animal that had learned life involved a lot of standing around. Alara untied her and climbed into the saddle with movements that had stopped being conscious years ago. The ride back to the ranch took 40 minutes at an easy walk. She didn't hurry. The land spread out on either side of the road in shades of brown and yellow-green, stubborn grass clinging to hard earth under a sky that went on forever. The Broken Spoke sat in a shallow valley where a creek ran most of the year. Thomas had chosen well. She'd give him that. The house was small but solid, built from logs and whitewashed boards that needed repainting. The barns were better maintained than the house because that's how ranchers worked. You took care of what made you money first. Caleb Reed was mending fence when she rode up. He looked up at the sound of hooves, and she saw him clock the expression on her face, or the lack of one, and go still in that way he had. Caleb didn't waste motion. He was lean and tall, maybe 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that were never quite clean because he worked with them all day, every day. He'd been with the Broken Spoke for 3 years. Thomas had hired him after finding him half-starved on the road from somewhere east, and he'd stayed because the work was steady and nobody asked questions about where he'd come from. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Caleb." She dismounted and led Smoke toward the barn. He fell into step beside her without asking if she needed help, just taking the mare's reins when she handed them over. They had a rhythm, the two of them. He did what needed doing, and she didn't have to explain. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About like you'd expect." He waited. Caleb was good at waiting. Alara leaned against the barn door and looked out at land that might not be hers in a year. The words felt ridiculous in her head, but she said them anyway because keeping them in wasn't going to change anything. "Thomas left the ranch to me, conditionally." "Conditionally?" "I have a year to produce a son, legitimate, born in wedlock, or it goes to Gideon Hale." Caleb's hands stopped moving. He'd been loosening the saddle cinch, and now he just stood there with the leather strap in his hands, staring at nothing in particular. "That's legal, apparently. I was going to say insane. That too." She pushed off from the door. "I'm going to check the water situation in the east pasture. We haven't had rain in 2 weeks." "Mrs. Quinn." "I'll be back before dark." She walked away before he could say whatever he was going to say, because sympathy would crack something in her, and she couldn't afford cracks. Not now. The east pasture was a 20-minute walk, and she took it at a pace that made her legs burn. Physical pain was simple, useful. It gave her something to focus on that wasn't the impossible arithmetic of her situation. No husband. No prospects for one. 12 months. She'd have laughed if she remembered how. Yika. The town learned about the will within 3 days, because nothing stayed private in Collier's Bend. By the 4th day, Alara couldn't walk into the general store without feeling eyes on her back, conversations dying mid-sentence when she passed. By the end of the week, she'd stopped going into town altogether. It was Caleb who brought back the supplies and the gossip. "They're taking bets," he said one evening, setting a sack of flour on the kitchen table with more force than necessary. Alara looked up from the ledger she'd been staring at without seeing. "On what?" "On whether you'll manage it. Most of them think you won't." He started unpacking with jerky movements. "Harriet Bowen asked if you'd considered advertising for a husband back east. Said she knew a widow in Denver who'd done it and got a perfectly respectable railroad man. How nice for her. Martha Simmons suggested you might think about accepting one of the very kind offers that have apparently been made." Alara closed the ledger. "What offers?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Dale Morrison, twice. And Peter Yates stopped me outside the feed store to say you should know he'd be willing to help you out of your predicament if you were friendly about it. Jesus. Frank Carver too, but he at least had the decency to look embarrassed." She pressed her fingers to her temples. Dale Morrison was 50 if he was a day, with a wife already, and a smell that preceded him into rooms. Peter Yates was barely 22 and still lived with his mother. Frank Carver was. Actually, Frank wasn't terrible, but he was also not someone she wanted within 10 feet of her, let alone closer. "What'd you tell them?" she asked. "Told Morrison to go to hell. Told Yates if he spoke to you I'd break his hands. Told Carver you weren't interested in help from anyone. Thank you. Didn't do it for thanks." He shoved the empty sack into the corner with unnecessary violence. "Did it because they're vultures. Whole towns acting like you're carrion." Alara stood up and moved to the stove, where coffee sat thick and bitter from this morning. She poured herself a cup just to have something to do with her hands. "They're not wrong about my situation." "Your situation isn't their entertainment." "No, it's their cautionary tale." She took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible. "Woman tries to hold property without a man. See what happens?" Caleb made a noise that might have been agreement or disgust. Hard to tell. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, and she could feel him looking at her with that assessing gaze he got sometimes, like he was trying to work out a problem that didn't have a clear solution. "You could sell," he said finally. "To who? Hale would buy it for pennies, and I'd have nothing. Anyone else would have to outbid him, and nobody in this town wants to cross Harold Hale. You could leave. Start somewhere else." "With what money?" The ranch is everything I have. Without it, I'm just another woman with no prospects and no options. She set the cup
This
down
story
harder
was
than she
posted
meant
on the
to.
channel The Rusty
I'm not
Saddle.
running.
Please do not repost
Didn't
it in
think you
any
would.
form.
They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and red that looked like something was burning on the horizon. Alara watched it through the window and felt the weight of time, not the abstract idea of it, but the actual physical pressure of days ticking past like water draining from a bucket with a hole in the bottom. I need to think, she said. Caleb nodded and pushed off the counter. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He left without saying the things he clearly wanted to say, which was one of the qualities she appreciated most about him. The door closed with a soft click, and Alara was alone with the ledger, the terrible coffee, and a problem that didn't care how impossible it was. Gideon Hale came calling on a Tuesday afternoon, riding a chestnut gelding that probably cost more than Alara's entire herd. He was 28, handsome in the way of men who'd never worried about money, with fair hair and the kind of smile that had probably charmed plenty of women in finer towns than this. He wore a coat that still had the stiffness of something new, and his boots shined despite the dust. Alara met him on the porch because she didn't want him inside her house. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, removing his hat with a flourish that belonged in a parlor, not a ranch yard. "I hope I'm not intruding." "What do you want, Gideon?" His smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she wasn't playing along with the dance of manners. Direct. "I appreciate that. May I?" He gestured to the porch steps. "Suit yourself." He sat with careful attention to his coat, making sure it didn't crease wrong. Alara remained standing, arms crossed. Caleb had appeared from somewhere, probably the barn, and was watching from a distance that could be covered quickly if needed. She didn't acknowledge him, but she knew he was there. "I wanted to express my condolences," Gideon said. "I know Thomas and I weren't close, but I respected him. That's kind of you. I also wanted to discuss the situation regarding the ranch. There's nothing to discuss." "Mrs. Quinn, Alara, if I may, I think we both know this condition in the will is unreasonable. My father shouldn't have pushed for it, and I told him so. A year to produce an heir? It's medieval." She waited. He shifted, and the smile took on a different quality, something he probably thought was gentle, understanding. "I want you to know that I bear you no ill will. When the year passes and the property transfers, I'll make sure you're taken care of. A small house in town, perhaps. An allowance. You'd be comfortable." "How generous. I'm trying to be reasonable. Reasonable would be your father forgiving the debt. Reasonable would be giving me a fair price for the land if he wants it so badly. This?" She waved a hand. "This is you, circling like a crow, waiting for me to fail so you can pick the bones." His expression hardened. The charm fell away, and underneath was something colder, more honest. "You will fail. You're alone. You're broke. And you have less than a year to find a husband and have a child. The math doesn't work, Alara. I'm offering you a way out that doesn't end with you destitute. I'm not interested in your offers." "Then you're a fool." "Probably, but I'm a fool who still owns this ranch, so you can get back on your expensive horse and ride home to your father." Gideon stood, brushing dust from his coat that wasn't there. His face had gone tight. "You think you're strong, refusing help. You're not. You're just stubborn. And stubbornness doesn't change reality. We'll see. He walked to his horse with stiff movements, the kind that said he wanted to say more but had enough sense not to. He mounted with practiced ease and looked down at her from the saddle, backlit by the afternoon sun. "September 14th, he said. "I'll be counting the days." He rode off at a canter that kicked up dust, making a show of it. Alara watched until he disappeared over the rise, then let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Caleb approached slowly, like she was a horse that might spook. "You all right?" "Fine. I know what it was." She turned and went back into the house, leaving him standing in the yard with whatever he'd been about to say, dying on his lips. October came with the first hard frost. and Alara still didn't have a plan. She'd run through every scenario in her head during sleepless nights, and they all ended the same way. Impossible. Finding a husband in less than a year who wasn't a vulture or a fool required time she didn't have. Having a child required, well, it required the obvious, and then 9 months, and then the baby had to survive 3 months after that. The arithmetic was brutal. She was in the barn, forking hay into the stalls, when Mrs. Lorna Pritchard found her. Lorna was 60-something, widowed twice, and ran the boarding house in town with the kind of efficiency that made grown men nervous. She'd been kind to Alara once, years ago, when Thomas had first brought her to Collier's Bend as a new bride who didn't know sagebrush from tumbleweed. "Alara Quinn, you're a harder woman to track down than a rabbit in brush," Lorna said, appearing in the barn doorway like a well-dressed ghost. Alara set down the pitchfork. "Mrs. Pritchard, this is a surprise." "I imagine so. Can we talk?" "About?" "About the fact that you're running out of time and options, and everyone in town is watching you flounder like it's a Sunday entertainment." Alara almost smiled. Lorna didn't dress things up. "All right, talk." They sat on hay bales that prickled through Alara's skirt, and Lorna got straight to it. "You need a husband." "I've noticed. A real one. Not one of these opportunistic fools who think they can take advantage. Someone who'll marry you, give you a child, and not make your life hell in the process." "You know someone like that?" "Because I've been looking, and the prospects are thin." Lorna pulled a piece of paper from her bag, a folded advertisement that had been cut from a newspaper. She handed it over. "There's services, agencies. They match women out west with men back east who are looking for wives. Respectable men, mostly. Farmers, tradesmen, men who want land and family." Alara read the advertisement. It was surprisingly formal, promising suitable matches for discerning individuals and thorough vetting of all applicants. It looked legitimate, which somehow made it worse. "I'd be buying a husband," she said. "You'd be solving a problem. And before you get all high-minded about it, remember that half the marriages in this territory started as transactions. Love's a luxury. You need results. What if he's terrible? What if he's not? What if he's just a man who wants a fresh start and doesn't ask too many questions?" Lorna leaned forward. "You've got 7 months, Alara, maybe 8 if you're lucky with timing. You can spend them being proud, or you can spend them being practical." Alara folded the paper carefully, creasing it along lines that were already there. The words blurred a little. She blinked hard. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long." Lorna left the way she came, and Alara sat in the barn with the advertisement in her hands, and the smell of hay and horse all around her. Somewhere in the rafters, a bird was building a nest, dragging straw piece by piece with a patience that mocked her urgency. She stayed there until the light started to fail, and then she went back to the house and put the advertisement in the drawer with the ledgers, where she wouldn't have to look at it, but would know exactly where it was. November brought snow early, and with it, a kind of quiet that felt like the world holding its breath. Alara wrote 3 letters to the matrimonial agency and burned them all. The words looked ridiculous on paper, seeking husband for practical arrangement, like she was ordering supplies instead of trying to reshape her entire life. On the 4th attempt, she sent the letter before she could change her mind. The response came 2 weeks later. A thin envelope with careful handwriting and a list of 3 men who'd expressed interest. Their descriptions were clinical: ages, occupations, basic histories. No photographs. Just words on paper trying to represent human beings. James Tolliver, 34, carpenter from Pennsylvania. Looking for land and opportunity. Willing to relocate. Marcus Webb, 41, former soldier. Experience with horses and farming. No family. Henry Ashford, 29, schoolteacher. Seeking new start after personal loss. She read them over breakfast while Caleb worked on repairing a saddle at the other end of the table. He didn't ask what she was reading, but she could feel the question in the air between them. "The matrimonial agency sent matches," she said finally. His hand stopped moving. "You went through with it." "I'm running out of time. There's still..." "Still what, Caleb? Still hope that some perfect solution will wander onto the ranch? That I'll wake up and this will all be different?" She set the paper down harder than necessary. I'm being practical. You're being desperate. Same thing, in my position. He stood up, the chair scraping
This story
loud
was
against the
posted
floor.
on the channel The
You don't
Rusty
know these
Saddle.
men.
Please
You'd be
do not
marrying a
repost
stranger
it in
and
any
hoping he's
form.
not a monster. Most marriages start with less knowledge than this. At least these men know what they're getting into. Do they? Does the advertisement mention that you need a son within the year, or you lose everything? That you're not looking for a partner, just a... He stopped himself. Just a what? Nothing. Say it. You're looking for stud service, Alara. Let's not dress it up as something else. The words hit like a slap. She stood up too, facing him across the table with anger rising hot in her chest. What exactly do you suggest I do instead? Because I'm open to ideas, Caleb. I really am. But standing here judging me for making hard choices doesn't solve a damn thing. I'm not judging. The hell you're not. She grabbed the papers and shoved them back into the envelope. I didn't ask for this situation. I didn't ask for Thomas to saddle me with an impossible condition. I didn't ask for Gideon Hale to circle like a vulture or for the whole town to watch me fail. But here I am, trying to survive with the options I have, and you're telling me I'm wrong for it. That's not what I... Then what are you saying? He opened his mouth, closed it. Something complicated moved across his face. Frustration, anger, something else she couldn't name. I'm saying you deserve better than this. Well, I don't have better. I have this. She walked out before he could respond, taking the envelope with her and leaving him standing in the kitchen with half-formed words and a broken saddle. The cold bit at her face the second she stepped outside, but she welcomed it. Clear, sharp, real. She made it to the barn before the tears came, hot and angry and useless. December arrived with bitter winds and the kind of cold that made bones ache. Alara chose Henry Ashford, the schoolteacher, because his letter mentioned loss and she thought maybe someone who'd suffered would understand desperation. They exchanged exactly 4 letters before he wrote to say he'd accepted a teaching position in California instead and wouldn't be coming after all. She chose Marcus Webb next. He lasted 3 days after arriving, took one look at the ranch, the isolation, the reality of what she needed from him, and left on the next stage out of town without a word. Just gone, like he'd never existed. James Tolliver never arrived at all. By January, the matrimonial agency had sent her 2 more prospects. One turned out to be married already. His wife showed up at the boarding house looking for him. The other took one evening in town, heard the gossip about Alara's situation, and propositioned her in terms so crude that Lorna Pritchard threw him out bodily and told him if he came back, she'd shoot him herself. I'm done with agencies, Alara told Lorna over coffee in the boarding house kitchen. It's not working. Then what? I don't know. That was the truth. She didn't know. She'd tried the respectable route, and it had failed spectacularly. She had 4 months left, maybe 5 if she could push the deadline, and no husband, no prospects, no plan. The town's betting pool was heavily weighted toward her losing the ranch. Even the people who liked her thought she was finished. She rode back to the Broken Spoke in a fog of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the weather. Caleb was working on the roof of the barn, hammering new shingles into place despite the cold. He climbed down when he saw her. "How'd it go?" he asked. "It didn't." He nodded like he'd expected that. "Want help with smoke?" "I've got her." But she didn't move to unsaddle the mare. She just stood there in the yard, looking at the house and the barn and the land that stretched out in all directions, and felt the weight of it pressing down until her knees wanted to buckle. "I'm going to lose it," she said quietly. "The ranch. I'm going to lose it all. You don't know that. I do. The math doesn't work. There's not enough time." She finally looked at him. His face was ruddy from cold and work, his hands rough where they held the hammer. "I tried. I really tried. I know. It's not enough. Maybe..." He stopped, shook his head. "Maybe what?" "Nothing. Forget it." She was too tired to push. She led Smoke into the barn and took care of her with movements that had become automatic. Unsaddle, brush down, check hooves, fresh water. Caleb followed but didn't speak, just hung up the saddle when she was done and closed the stall door. They walked back to the house in silence. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and purple that were almost too beautiful to bear. Elara paused on the porch steps and looked west, toward where the Hale property started about 5 miles distant. "He's going to win," she said. "Gideon. He's going to get everything, and there's nothing I can do about it." Caleb stood beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth coming off him despite the cold. "You've still got time." "Not enough." "Maybe it's not about time. Maybe it's about—" He stopped again, and this time frustration colored his voice. "Damn it, Elara." She turned to look at him. "What?" But he just shook his head and went inside, leaving her on the porch with questions and the dying light, and the terrible certainty that she'd already lost. February came in like a lion, dumping snow in amounts that shut down the roads and trapped everyone in place. Elara spent the days tending animals and nights staring at ledgers that told the same story in different numbers. She was running out of everything: money, time, options. The town didn't need roads to spread gossip. Somehow, news still filtered out to the ranch, usually through Caleb, who made the trek into town for supplies when the weather broke. He'd come back tight-lipped and angry, and she'd stopped asking what he'd heard because she already knew. Pity. Schadenfreude. Bets being settled as the odds shifted even further against her. She was in the barn one evening, checking on a horse that had thrown a shoe earlier when Caleb found her. He'd been quiet all day, moving around like he had something on his mind, but couldn't figure out how to say it. "Spit it out," Elara said without looking up from the hoof she was examining. "What?" "Whatever's eating at you, just say it." He leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. In the lantern light, his face was all shadows and angles. "Dale Morrison's telling people you approached him. About an arrangement." She dropped the hoof and straightened. "I what?" "He's saying you offered him money to father a child without marrying you." The fury came fast and hot. "That's a lie. I know it's a lie, but it's spreading. Martha Simmons heard it from her husband, who heard it at the saloon, and now half the town thinks you're—" He stopped. "Thinks I'm what? A whore? Is that the word you can't say?" "I'm just telling you what they're saying." Elara walked past him out of the stall, her hands shaking with rage. "Dale Morrison is a liar and a drunk who can't stand that I wouldn't give him the time of day, and now he's ruining what's left of my reputation because he can. I know. Do you? Because it feels like the whole damn world is just waiting for me to fail so they can point and say, 'See, we told you. Women can't hold property. Women can't manage alone.' And now they get to add desperate and immoral to the list. No one who matters believes it. Everyone matters when they're spreading lies." She paced the barn, energy she couldn't contain making her movements sharp. "Every woman who won't talk to me. Every man who thinks I'm fair game now. Every person who'll testify against me if it comes to court. They all matter." Caleb watched her with that steady gaze that never seemed rattled by anything. "What are you going to do?" "What can I do? Challenge Dale to a duel? Sue him for slander with money I don't have? The damage is done." "Then let it be done. You know the truth. I know the truth. The truth doesn't matter if no one believes it." She stopped pacing and leaned against a support beam, suddenly exhausted. "I'm finished. Even if I somehow found a husband tomorrow, no one would believe the child was legitimate. They'd say I'd been sleeping around. They'd say the baby could be anyone's. Gideon would challenge it in court and he'd win because my reputation is already destroyed. That's not— It is, and you know it." She looked at him directly. "I'm finished, Caleb. This whole thing was impossible from the start, and I was a fool to think otherwise." The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with things neither of them were saying. Outside, wind howled around the barn, making the walls creak. A horse shifted in its stall, huffing softly. "There's one option," Caleb said finally, his voice quiet. "One you haven't considered. Unless it involves turning back time, I doubt it'll help. Marry me." The words hung in the air like something physical. Elara stared at him, certain she'd heard wrong. "What?" "Marry me." He pushed off from the stall door, and she realized his hands were shaking slightly. "We marry, quick and legal, and we—" We do what needs doing to secure the ranch. Her heart was pounding. Caleb, I know what you're going to say. That I'm being foolish. That it won't work. That you don't want to trap me in a marriage of convenience.
This
but
story was posted
hear
on the
me out.
channel The Rusty Saddle.
Scott's-
Please do not repost it in any
Tease.
form.
He took a step closer. I've worked this land for 3 years. I care about it. I care about... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. I care about what happens to it. To you. And watching you tear yourself apart trying to find some stranger who'll do right by you while the whole town circles like wolves. I can't do it anymore. You don't want this. You don't know what I want. A marriage based on biology, on necessity, that's not fair to you. Fair? He laughed, sharp and bitter. Nothing about this is fair, Alara. But at least this way you know who you're dealing with. You know I won't hurt you. You know I'll work the land properly. You know I won't run off when things get hard. She couldn't breathe properly. The barn felt too small, the air too thick. People will talk. They're already talking. They'll say you're taking advantage, that I'm desperate enough to settle for the help. Let them say it. As long as the ranch stays yours, stays ours, who cares what they say? I care. Why? Because you still think their opinion matters? Alara, they've already decided you're going to fail. They've already written you off. The only question now is whether you prove them right. She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this was a terrible idea, but standing there in the lamplight with Caleb looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone sideways, she couldn't think of a single one that mattered more than survival. This would change everything, she said. I know. You'd be tied to me, to this place. Forever, probably. I'm already tied to this place, have been for a while. Why? The question came out raw. Why would you do this? He was quiet for a long moment, and something moved across his face that she'd seen before but never named. Because someone should. Because you deserve better than being picked apart by vultures. Because... He stopped, then seemed to make a decision. Because I'm tired of watching you suffer alone when I could help. That's reason enough. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. All right, she heard herself say. All right. His eyes widened. You mean it? I mean it. But we do this properly. Legal marriage, real vows. No one can challenge it later. Agreed. And we figure out the rest as we go. Yes. They stood there. Two people who'd just agreed to something that would bind them together for life, and neither one knew quite what to do next. Finally, Caleb extended his hand like they were sealing a business deal. Alara took it. His palm was warm and calloused, familiar from years of working alongside him. She'd held this hand before, passing tools, helping with difficult animals, steadying each other on icy ground. This shouldn't feel different, but it did. We'll go to town tomorrow, she said. Find the minister. Get it done. Tomorrow. He agreed. They didn't let go right away. They left for town at first light, when the world was still gray and uncertain. Alara wore the same faded black dress she'd worn to hear the will read, because it was the only thing she owned that approached formal. Caleb had put on a clean shirt, still worn at the collar, but clean, and run water through his hair until it lay flat. Neither of them had slept much. She'd heard him moving around in the barn until well past midnight, and she'd spent the dark hours staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the only smart choice left. The ride into Collier's Bend took 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? The decision had been made. Now came the part where they lived with it. The minister's house sat at the edge of town, a tidy structure with white paint that had held up better than most buildings. Reverend Michael Shaw was in his garden when they arrived, pulling up the last of the winter vegetables. He straightened when he saw them, wiping dirt from his hands onto a cloth that had seen better days. Mrs. Quinn. Caleb. His gaze moved between them with the kind of assessment that came from years of reading people in moments of crisis. This is unexpected. We need to be married, Alara said. No point dancing around it. Shaw's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. I see. When were you thinking? Now. Now. unless there's a legal reason we have to wait. The minister looked at Caleb, who nodded confirmation. Shaw folded the cloth slowly, buying time to think. He was 50-something, balding, with kind eyes that had watched this town eat people alive for 2 decades. You understand there'll be talk. There's already talk, Alara said. Fair enough. Come inside. I'll need witnesses. He disappeared into the house and emerged 5 minutes later with his wife, Margaret, who took one look at Alara's face and seemed to understand everything without needing explanation. She squeezed Alara's hand once, quick and warm, then stood beside her husband without comment. The ceremony lasted maybe 10 minutes. Shaw read from a worn Bible, his voice steady and practiced. The words washed over Alara like water, something about love and honor and cherishing, promises that felt enormous and impossible in the small parlor that smelled like yesterday's bread. When it came time for vows, she heard herself speaking in a voice that sounded almost normal, promising things she wasn't sure she could deliver. Caleb's voice was rougher, like the words had to be dragged up from somewhere deep, but he got through them. Do you have a ring? Shaw asked. They looked at each other. Neither of them had thought that far ahead. Margaret disappeared and came back with a simple gold band, thin and worn. It was my mother's. She would have wanted it used for something that mattered. Caleb took it with careful hands, like it might break, and slid it onto Alara's finger. It was too large. She had to curl her hand to keep it from sliding off. It felt foreign and strange and surprisingly heavy for something so small. By the authority vested in me by the territory, Shaw said, I pronounce you husband and wife. That was it. No kiss, no celebration, just a pronouncement that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Alara was married to her ranch hand. In 6 months, she'd need to have his child. The absurdity of it would have made her laugh if her throat wasn't so tight. Shaw produced a certificate and had them both sign, then added his own signature with the careful penmanship of someone who understood that documents mattered. I'll file this with the county today. It'll be official by tomorrow. Thank you, Alara managed. I hope you know what you're doing, Shaw said, but his tone wasn't unkind, just honest. So do I. They left before anyone could ask questions or offer advice they didn't want. The town was waking up properly now, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving along the street with the morning's business. Alara saw Martha Simmons coming out of the general store and looked away before their eyes could meet. She couldn't handle pity or judgment, not right now. They were almost to their horses when a voice called out, Well, well, isn't this interesting? Gideon Hale stood outside the hotel, dressed like he was going to a business meeting in some city that actually had those. His coat was buttoned against the cold, and his expression was somewhere between amused and calculating. Caleb stepped slightly in front of Alara, a movement so subtle she almost missed it. Hale. Reed, or should I say Mr. Quinn, now. Gideon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Congratulations are in order, I suppose, though the timing is rather convenient, wouldn't you say? Say what you mean, Alara said, moving around Caleb. Just that you've been searching for a husband rather desperately, and suddenly your employee provides a solution. One has to wonder about the motivations involved. Wonder all you want. We're married legally. Shaw's filing the papers today. Oh, I don't doubt the legality, just the authenticity. He tilted his head, studying them like insects under glass. A marriage of convenience is still a marriage, I suppose, though whether it'll produce the required heir in time, that remains to be seen. We're done here, Caleb said. Are you? Because I'm not. Gideon took a step closer. You should know that my father's already consulting with lawyers about the exact wording of the will, about what constitutes a legitimate heir, about whether marriages entered into purely to circumvent inheritance conditions can be challenged. Alara's stomach dropped. The will says lawful marriage. We're lawfully married. It also says legitimate heir, and legitimacy can be questioned if fraud is involved. If it can be proven that the marriage was a sham entered into solely for financial gain, well, that's a different matter, isn't it? You can't prove that. Can't I? Your husband worked for you, slept in your barn, took orders from you for 3 years. Then suddenly, with time running out, he becomes your spouse? The optics aren't great, Alara. Caleb's jaw tightened. We're married. That's all that matters. For now. But I'd be careful if I were you. Make sure you can prove this marriage is real, because when the year is up and you present your child,
This
we'll be
story
looking
was
very
posted on the
closely at
channel
every
The
detail.
Rusty Saddle. Please
Gideon
do not
tipped his hat,
repost it in
the
any
gesture
form.
mocking. Enjoy your wedded bliss. He walked away before either of them could respond, his boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk with a confidence that made Alara want to scream. He's bluffing, Caleb said, but he didn't sound certain. Maybe. Or maybe he knows something we don't. She watched Gideon disappear into the hotel. We need to get home. The ride back felt longer than the ride in. Every word Gideon had said circled in Alara's head, picking at the fragile plan they'd constructed. A sham marriage, fraud, illegitimate heir. The law was full of loopholes for men who had money and lawyers, and Harold Hale had both. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped her down from her horse, a courtesy he'd never bothered with before, and they stood in the yard without quite knowing what came next. You should move your things into the house, Alara said finally. He looked at her. You sure? If we're trying to prove this is real, you can't keep sleeping in the barn. People will talk. People are already talking. Then let's give them something truthful to talk about. She started toward the house, then paused. We don't have to... we can figure out the rest later, but appearances matter now. I know. He went to gather his belongings from the small room he'd made for himself in the barn loft. Alara went inside and stared at the house with new eyes, seeing it as Caleb would. The main room was sparse, a table, chairs, a stove that worked more often than not. The bedroom where she'd slept alone for months was even simpler. One bed, one bureau. No room for pretense. She was stripping the sheets to put on fresh ones when Caleb appeared in the doorway with a single canvas bag that held everything he owned in the world. I can take the floor, he said. Don't be ridiculous. We're married. People expect... She stopped, feeling heat rise in her face. Just put your things in the bureau. The bottom drawer's empty. He did, moving with the careful awkwardness of someone entering a space they weren't sure they belonged in. When he was done, they stood on opposite sides of the room, and the silence felt loaded with expectations neither of them knew how to meet. I should check on the cattle, Caleb said. Right, yes, and I need to do something with the chickens. They fled in opposite directions like the house was on fire. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores that didn't need doing and conversations that went nowhere. By evening, Alara had scrubbed the kitchen floor twice and reorganized the pantry in 3 different configurations. Caleb had repaired every piece of tack in the barn and split enough wood to last them into April. Dinner was beans and cornbread, eaten mostly in silence. Alara pushed food around her plate and tried not to think about what came after. The sun was setting, painting the windows orange, and soon it would be dark and they'd have to address the reality of sharing a bed. I know this is strange, Caleb said suddenly. She looked up. That's one word for it. I meant what I said. About not forcing anything. We can take our time. We don't have time, that's the whole problem. We have enough. A few days won't matter in the long run. Alara set down her fork. Gideon's going to challenge this. You heard him. He'll say the marriage is fake, the child is fake, everything's fake. So we make sure it's not fake. How? By pretending we're in love? The whole town knows better. Maybe we don't have to pretend love. Maybe we just have to show up. Work together. Build something real, even if it started for the wrong reasons. He leaned back in his chair, and the lamplight caught the planes of his face, making him look older than his years. Most marriages out here start as transactions anyway. Ours is just more honest about it. That's supposed to make me feel better? I don't know, does it? She almost smiled. Almost. Not really? But something in her chest loosened slightly, enough to breathe a little easier. They cleared the dishes together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with a familiarity born from months of shared space, if not shared purpose. When everything was clean and put away, there was nothing left to do but address the elephant in the room. Alara went to the bedroom first, changing into her nightdress behind the screen in the corner while Caleb banked the fire in the main room. She was under the covers, rigid as a board, when he came in. He glanced at her, then at the floor, then back at her. I really can. Just get in the bed, Caleb. We're adults. We can sleep next to each other without it being a crisis. He undressed down to his undershirt and trousers, making a visible effort not to look at her while he did it, and climbed in on the far side. The bed was narrow enough that they couldn't avoid touching entirely, but he kept as much distance as possible, lying on his back like he was afraid to move. Alara blew out the lamp. Darkness rushed in, thick and complete. "This is ridiculous," she said into the blackness. "Yeah. We're married. We're going to have to. Eventually. I know. So lying here like strangers is just postponing the inevitable." She felt him shift slightly. "Are you saying No, not tonight. I'm just saying we should probably talk about it instead of pretending it isn't happening." A long pause. Then, "All right, talk." Where did she even start? Alara stared at the ceiling she couldn't see and tried to find words for something she'd barely let herself think about. "I've only been with Thomas, and it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly good either. He was in a hurry most of the time, like it was something to get through. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm just trying to say I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want this to be awful for either of us. It won't be awful. How do you know?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because I care about you. That's got to count for something." The words settled between them, simple and enormous. Alara rolled onto her side, facing where she knew he was, even though she couldn't see him. "Do you care about me?" "Yes." "Why? Does there have to be a reason?" "Usually." She heard him breathe out slowly, gathering thoughts. "You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You don't complain when things are impossible. You treat people fairly even when they don't deserve it. And you—" He stopped. "I what?" "You make me want to stay in one place. I haven't wanted that in a long time." Something in her throat tightened. She reached out in the darkness, found his hand on the blanket, and held it. His fingers closed around hers carefully, like she was something that might break. They fell asleep like that, hands linked in the dark, and if it wasn't love, it was at least honest. The town learned about the marriage within 2 days because of course it did. Lorna Pritchard came out to the ranch on the third morning, riding side saddle on a horse that looked too refined for her practical nature. She found Alara hanging laundry and didn't bother with preamble. "You married Caleb Reed." "I did. Without telling anyone. It was a private decision." Lorna dismounted and tied her horse to the fence post with efficient movements. "Half the town thinks you've lost your mind. The other half thinks you're brilliant. I'm not sure which camp I'm in yet." "Does it matter?" "Probably not, but I'm curious anyway." She picked up a wet sheet and helped pin it to the line. "Is it real?" Alara looked at her. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind I'm asking because I care about you and I don't want to see you hurt worse than you already are. Is this a marriage or is this a business arrangement that looks like a marriage? Can it be both?" "It can, but you need to know which one you're in because they require different things." They worked in silence for a moment, the wind whipping the sheets around them. Alara's hands were cold, and the ring Margaret Shaw had given her kept sliding around her finger. "I don't know what it is yet," she admitted. "We're figuring it out." "That's honest, at least." Lorna pinned the last corner of the sheet. "People are going to say terrible things. You know that, right? They're going to say he's after your land, that you're desperate, that the whole thing is a farce. Let them say it." "You're stronger than I thought." "I'm not strong. I'm just out of options." Alara picked up the empty basket. "Coffee?" They went inside where Caleb was fixing a hinge on one of the cabinets. He looked up when they entered, and something flickered across his face when he saw Lorna. Wariness, maybe, or just the natural caution of someone who knew gossip traveled fast. "Mrs. Pritchard, Mr. Reed, or should I say Mr. Quinn? Caleb's fine." "Caleb, then." She settled at the table while Alara put coffee on to boil. "I won't stay long. Just wanted to see how you're both doing." "We're managing," Caleb said. He finished with the hinge and tested the cabinet door. It swung smoothly now, no longer catching. "You didn't ride all the way out here just to check on us." No, I came to warn you. Lorna's expression turned serious. Harold Hale's been asking questions about your marriage, about whether it's legitimate. He's got his lawyers looking into territorial marriage law, trying to find any angle they can use to challenge it. Alara set cups on the table harder than necessary. Gideon already threatened as much. It's not just threats anymore. They're building a case, collecting testimony from people about your relationship before the marriage, about where Caleb slept, how you interacted, whether there was any indication of romantic involvement. There wasn't, Caleb said flatly. I know, that's the problem. They're going to argue the marriage is fraudulent, that you entered into it solely to meet the conditions of the will. Which is true, Alara said, at least partially. Then you need to make the rest of it true. Fast.
This story was posted on the channel
Lorna
The
looked
Rusty
between them.
Saddle. Please do
I'm
not
saying you
repost
need to
it in any
perform for
form.
the town, but you need to be seen together, acting like a married couple, shopping together, attending church together, making it clear this isn't just a legal arrangement. The coffee boiled over, hissing on the stove. Alara grabbed it off the heat and poured 3 cups with shaking hands. We're doing the best we can. I know you are, but best we can might not be enough if the Hales come at you with everything they've got. Lorna took the cup Alara handed her. I'm on your side. You need to know that. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, I'll testify that I've seen you together, that you seem like any other married couple. But you need to give me something to testify to. After she left, Alara and Caleb sat at the table with cooling coffee and the weight of expectations they weren't sure how to meet. She's right, Caleb said. We need to be more visible. I know. There's a town meeting next week about water rights. We should go. The thought of sitting in a room full of people who were watching them like a curiosity show made Ilara's stomach turn. Fine. And church on Sunday. I haven't been to church since Thomas died. All the more reason to go now. Show we're taking this seriously. He was right. She hated that he was right, but facts were facts. They needed witnesses. They needed proof. They needed to convince a whole town that their hasty marriage was more than just a desperate attempt to hold on to land. Sunday came too fast. Alara wore her least faded dress and tried to do something with her hair that didn't look like she'd been fighting with it. Caleb put on his only jacket, the one with patches at the elbows, and looked about as comfortable as a cat in water. They rode into town together on the wagon, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched with every bump in the road. The church was already full when they arrived. Heads turned. Conversation stuttered and stopped. Alara felt every eye in the room tracking their movement as they found seats near the back. Caleb's hand found hers, and she held on tighter than she probably should have. Reverend Shaw's sermon was about patience and faith, which felt pointed even though he never looked their direction. Afterward, people clustered in small groups outside, and Alara braced herself for the onslaught. Martha Simmons approached first, her daughter Clara trailing behind with eyes that wouldn't quite meet Alara's. Mrs. Quinn, or is it Mrs. Reed now? Quinn, Alara said. Caleb had taken her name, which had surprised her until he'd explained that he didn't have much attachment to his own. Another thing the town would gossip about. Well, congratulations. Martha's smile was tight. It was all very sudden. When you know, Caleb said, and his voice had an edge to it. Of course. And you've known each other for quite some time, haven't you? 3 years, Alara said. He's been with the ranch since Thomas hired him. How convenient. Clara tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, we should go. But Martha wasn't done. I just hope you know what you're doing. Marriage is a sacred institution, not a business transaction. Good thing it's both, Caleb said. They left Martha sputtering and made their way through the crowd with forced smiles and short answers. By the time they reached the wagon, Alara felt like she'd been through a war. She climbed up without waiting for help and sat rigid on the bench while Caleb took up the reins. That was horrible, she said once they were clear of town. Could have been worse. How? Nobody threw anything. She laughed, sharp and sudden, and then couldn't stop. It wasn't funny. None of it was funny, But the tension had to go somewhere, and it came out in gasping laughter that bordered on hysteria until Caleb put an arm around her shoulders and she buried her face against his chest and just breathed. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "Will we?" "Yes." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that showing up and going through motions and pretending they were just another married couple would be enough. But Gideon's words kept echoing in her head. Prove this marriage is real, and she didn't know how to prove something that was still figuring itself out. That night, lying in the dark again, she turned to face him. "We need to try." She felt him go still. "Try what?" "You know what? Alara, we're running out of time. March is half over. If we're going to have a child by September, we need to start now. I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm already pressured. The whole situation is pressure." She reached out and found his face in the darkness, traced the line of his jaw. "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything, but we should try." His hand came up to cover hers. "Are you sure?" No. She wasn't sure of anything except that time was slipping away and desperation made cowards of everyone. But she said, "Yes." He kissed her then, careful and questioning, and she kissed back because this was her choice, her decision, her life she was fighting for. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't swept away by passion. It was two people trying to find something real in the middle of impossible circumstances. And it was awkward and uncertain and nothing like she'd imagined. But it was honest. Afterward, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled like soap and sweat, and Caleb held her like she might disappear if he let go. "Did I hurt you?" he asked. "No." "You're crying." She hadn't realized. She wiped at her face angrily. "I'm fine." "You're allowed to not be fine. If I'm not fine, I fall apart, and I can't afford to fall apart." He pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. "Then fall apart here, where no one's watching. I'll help you put the pieces back together." She did. She cried into his chest until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, cried for Thomas and the baby she'd lost, and the life she'd thought she'd have, cried for the impossible situation and the town's judgment and the fear that none of this would be enough. And Caleb held her through all of it, steady as stone, until she had nothing left and sleep finally took her under. When she woke, pale light was filtering through the window and Caleb was already gone. She found him in the barn, feeding horses, and neither of them mentioned the night before. They just moved through the day's work with the quiet understanding of people who'd seen each other vulnerable and survived it. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. They worked the ranch during the day, mending fences, caring for animals, preparing for spring planting. They went into town when necessary, presenting a united front to curious eyes and sharp tongues. And at night, in the privacy of their small house, they learned each other in increments, figuring out what worked and what didn't, building something that might become real if they gave it enough time. April arrived with rain that turned everything green and hopeful. Alara's monthly courses didn't come when they should have, and hope became a fragile, terrifying thing. She waited another week to be sure, then another, until she was nearly certain but afraid to say it out loud. She told Caleb one morning while they were working on the roof of the barn, replacing shingles that had blown off in a storm. "I think I might be pregnant." His hammer slipped and nearly took off his thumb. "You think?" "I'm late. I'm never late." He sat back on his heels, and his face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on something like cautious joy. "How late?" 3 weeks. That's good, right?" "Maybe. If it sticks." She couldn't look at him, focused on the shingle she was nailing down instead. "I lost one before, with Thomas. Made it 5 months, and then just lost her." "Her?" "I think it was a girl. Never knew for sure." The nail went in crooked. She pulled it out and tried again. "So being late doesn't mean anything definite. Not yet." Caleb reached over and stilled her hands. "But it means something." "Yes." They sat on the roof with the valley spread out below them, spring turning everything soft and possible, and for the first time since Thomas had died, Alara let herself feel something like hope. It didn't last. 3 days later, Gideon Hale showed up at the ranch with 2 men in suits, and expressions that meant trouble. Alara met them in the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. Caleb appeared from the barn, moving to stand beside her with the easy protectiveness that had become natural. "Mr. Hale," Alara said, "what brings you out here?" "Official business, I'm afraid." Gideon gestured to the men. "This is Mr. Porter and Mr. Weeks. They're attorneys representing my father's interests regarding the disputed property." "There's nothing disputed.
This story was posted
will's
on the
terms are
channel The
clear.
Rusty Saddle. Please do
Indeed
not
they are,
repost it in any
which is
form.
why we're here to verify compliance." Porter, or maybe it was Weeks, produced a document. "We'll need to inspect the marriage certificate, confirm its legitimacy, interview both parties separately about the nature of the relationship." "You can't do that," Caleb said. "Actually, we can. The will stipulates certain conditions must be met. We have every right to verify those conditions are being fulfilled in good faith, not through fraudulent means." Alara's hands clenched into fists. "Our marriage is legal. Reverend Shaw filed the papers. It's all above board." "Then you'll have no objection to our investigation." They spent 2 hours being interrogated, separately, just like Porter had said, answering invasive questions about their relationship, their sleeping arrangements, their reasons for marrying. The lawyers wrote everything down in neat script, their faces giving away nothing. When they finally left, Alara felt scraped raw. She sat on the porch steps and stared at nothing while Caleb paced the yard like a caged animal. "This is just the beginning," she said. "They're going to pick apart every aspect of our lives. Let them. They won't find anything." "Won't they? We got married in a hurry. We barely know each other. Half the town thinks this is a sham. The other half doesn't. That might not be enough." She looked up at him. "What if they win? What if they prove the marriage is fraudulent and take everything anyway?" Caleb stopped pacing and crouched in front of her, taking her hands. "Then we fight, in court, in public, wherever we have to. But we don't give up. I'm tired of fighting." "I know, but you're good at it." He squeezed her hands. "And you're not alone anymore. That has to count for something." She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his, and they stayed like that while the sun set and the world turned and impossible things remained impossible but slightly more bearable. Inside her, something the size of a poppy seed was growing, something that might save everything or cost her more than she'd already lost. She didn't know which yet, but she knew she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. May brought heat that felt vindictive, the kind that baked the ground hard and made tempers run short. Alara's body started changing in ways that confirmed what she'd suspected but been afraid to believe. Her breasts grew tender. Certain smells made her stomach turn. She was tired all the time, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could touch. She waited until she was absolutely certain before telling anyone besides Caleb. 6 weeks late. 7. By 8 weeks, she couldn't deny it anymore, and keeping it secret felt dishonest in a way that might hurt them later. They told Lorna first, riding into town on a Saturday morning when the streets were busy with weekend commerce. Lorna took one look at Alara's face and knew. "You're expecting." "Yes." Lorna's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that might have been relief. "How far along?" 2 months, I think, maybe a bit more." "And you're feeling all right?" "Tired. Sick in the mornings, but all right." They were sitting in Lorna's private quarters above the boarding house, away from curious ears. Caleb stood by the window, looking out at the street like he was watching for threats. Maybe he was. "This is good news," Lorna said carefully, "but it's also going to accelerate everything. Once the Hales find out, they'll intensify their investigation." "Let them," Caleb said without turning around. "Easy to say, harder to live through." Lorna poured tea that Alara's stomach immediately rebelled against. She pushed the cup away. "Have you told anyone else?" "No, we wanted to tell you first." "I'm honored, and I'll keep it quiet as long as you want. But people are going to notice eventually, especially other women." "I know." Alara folded her hands on the table, and the 2 large rings slid around her finger. "We just wanted someone in our corner who knew the truth before the rumors started." "You have that. You've always had that." Lorna reached across and squeezed Alara's hand. Whatever happens, I'll testify to what I've seen. A married couple expecting their first child. Nothing fraudulent about it. They left before the lunch crowd arrived at the boarding house, but not before Martha Simmons saw them coming down the stairs. Her eyes went sharp and assessing, lingering on Alara's midsection in a way that made Alara want to wrap her arms around herself protectively. Mrs. Quinn, Mr. Reed? Martha's voice dripped false sweetness. How lovely to see you both. You're looking well, Alara, almost glowing. Thank you. Married life must agree with you. It does. Martha tilted her head like a bird eyeing prey. I do hope we'll be hearing happy news soon. It would be such a shame if the ranch situation remained unresolved. Caleb's hand found the small of Alara's back, warm and steadying. We'll let you know if there's anything worth sharing. They escaped to the wagon before Martha could dig deeper, but the damage was done. By evening, half the town would be speculating. By tomorrow, it would reach the Hales. Should have kept my mouth shut, Alara said as they drove home. You didn't say anything. Didn't have to. She knew. Women always know. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, is that a bad thing? I don't know yet. The baby, because she had to start thinking of it as that, as a real thing instead of just a possibility, made itself known in small, relentless ways. Food tasted wrong. Her favorite coffee became nauseating. She threw up most mornings, usually in the bushes behind the barn where Caleb wouldn't hear, though he always seemed to know anyway. He started leaving water and dry bread on the kitchen table before he went out to work, and she was grateful in a way that made her throat tight. The ranch work didn't stop for pregnancy. Cattle still needed tending. Fences still needed mending. The creek ran low despite the spring rains, and they spent a week digging a new channel to redirect water to the east pasture. Alara worked until her back ached and her hands blistered, ignoring Caleb's increasingly pointed suggestions that she should rest. I'm pregnant, not dying, she snapped one afternoon when he tried to take the shovel from her hands. You're exhausted. I'll rest when the work's done. Alara, I said I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. The exhaustion was getting worse, dragging at her like weights tied to her ankles. She pushed through it because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting all the ways this could still fall apart. The baby might not make it. She'd lost one before. What made her think this time would be different? And even if the baby survived, the Hales were building their case, looking for any crack in the foundation to wedge open and destroy. She was so focused on not thinking that she didn't notice Caleb watching her with increasing worry until he forced the issue one evening after dinner. You need to see a doctor. She looked up from the ledger she'd been staring at without really seeing. What? A doctor. Someone who can make sure you and the baby are healthy. We can't afford a doctor. We can't afford not to. He sat down across from her and his face was serious in the lamplight. You're working yourself into the ground. You barely eat. You look like a strong wind would knock you over. This isn't sustainable. I'm managing. You're not, and I'm not going to watch you kill yourself trying to prove something to people who don't matter. The anger came fast and hot. Don't matter? The Hales matter. The court matters. Every person in this town who's waiting to see me fail. They all matter because their opinions become evidence. Not if you're dead. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Alara closed the ledger with shaking hands. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is you acting like you have to do this alone when you have a husband standing right here trying to help. I don't know how to let you help. Then learn. His voice softened. Please, let me do this. Let me take you to a doctor. Let me carry some of this weight. She wanted to refuse, wanted to keep grinding herself down because at least that pain was familiar, controllable. But something in his face stopped her. Not pity, not frustration, just honest concern that she didn't know how to argue against. All right, she said quietly. We'll go. Dr. Catherine Wells ran her practice out of a small building on the edge of Collier's Bend, seeing patients 3 days a week and spending the rest of her time traveling to outlying ranches and homesteads. She was 40-something, sharp-eyed, with hands that had delivered half the babies in the county and set more broken bones than she could count. She took one look at Alara and pointed to the examination table. Up. Let's see what we're working with. The examination was thorough and impersonal. Dr. Wells pressed and prodded, Asked questions Alara answered honestly and made notes in a leather-bound book. Caleb waited in the outer room, and Alara was grateful for the privacy, even though she knew he'd want to know everything afterward. "You're about 10 weeks along," Dr. Wells said finally. "Baby seems healthy from what I can tell, but you're underweight and clearly exhausted. Are you eating? When I can keep it down. Try smaller meals more frequently. Dry toast in the morning before you get up. Ginger tea if you can get it. And for heaven's sake, stop whatever physical labor
This story
you're
was
doing.
posted on the channel
I
The
run a
Rusty
ranch.
Saddle. Please do not
Then find
repost
someone
it
else
in
to
any
run it for
form.
the next few months. You're at risk for losing this baby if you keep pushing yourself like this." The words hit like cold water. "I lost one before, at 5 months. Doctor." Wells's expression softened slightly. "Then you know how precarious early pregnancy can be. You want this baby to make it? Yes? Then rest, eat, let your husband handle the heavy work." She closed her notebook. "I want to see you again in a month. Sooner if you start bleeding or cramping." The ride home was quiet. Caleb didn't push for details, just drove the wagon at a careful pace and kept glancing over like he was afraid she might break. When they reached the ranch, he helped her down with more care than necessary. "What did she say?" Alara told him everything: the baby's health, her weight, the risk of losing it if she didn't slow down. She watched his face cycle through relief and worry and determination. "Then you slow down," he said. "I can handle the ranch work. Not alone. There's too much. Then we hire someone, temporary help until after the baby comes." "With what money?" "We'll figure it out." He took her hands, and his grip was warm and solid. "Alara, listen to me. The ranch doesn't matter if you're not here to run it. The baby doesn't matter if you work yourself to death trying to keep everything perfect. We need you alive and healthy more than we need every fence mended and every cow accounted for." She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why she couldn't afford to rest, couldn't afford to show weakness, couldn't afford to be anything less than completely in control. But standing in the yard with Caleb holding her hands and the evening sun painting everything gold, she was just too tired to fight. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They hired a boy from town named Jesse, 17, strong, willing to work for room and board plus a small wage they'd figure out how to pay later. He slept in the barn loft where Caleb used to sleep and took on the heavy lifting that Alara had been doing. She hated every minute of stepping back, hated watching other people do work she'd always handled herself. But she did it because the alternative was unthinkable. June brought news that the Hales had filed formal papers with the territorial court, challenging the validity of Ilara's marriage and claiming the will's conditions hadn't been met in good faith. A hearing was scheduled for late August, conveniently before the September deadline, but after it would be clear whether Alara was actually pregnant. The lawyer they consulted, a tired man named Bernard Frost, who worked out of a cramped office above the general store, was not optimistic. "They're arguing fraud," he explained, shuffling through papers that looked like they'd been shuffled too many times already. "Claiming you entered into the marriage solely to circumvent the will's intent. That it's a sham designed to produce an heir without the genuine marital relationship the testator intended." "We are genuinely married," Caleb said. "I believe you, but proving it to a judge is different. They'll call witnesses who'll testify you were employer and employee right up until the deadline started looming. They'll point out the timing. They'll question whether the child is actually yours, Mr. Reed, or whether there were other men involved." Alara's hands clenched in her lap. "That's slander. That's legal strategy. If they can create doubt about the child's paternity, they undermine your entire case." Frost looked at them over his spectacles. "You need witnesses who can testify to the legitimacy of your relationship, people who've seen you together as a married couple, who can speak to your character and intentions." "We have Lorna Pritchard," Alara said. "Good. Who else?" The list was depressingly short. Reverend Shaw, who'd married them, Dr. Wells, who'd examined Alara, a few neighbors who'd seen them together but weren't exactly friendly. The town's opinion had shifted from curious to suspicious, and most people were keeping their distance like failure might be contagious. "What about character witnesses?" Frost asked. "People who've known you for years and can speak to your integrity?" Alara thought of the women who'd stopped talking to her, the men who'd made crude propositions, the community that had watched her struggle and turned it into entertainment. There's not many left who'd speak for me. Then we'll work with what we have. Frost made notes. The good news is that if you produce a healthy male child born in lawful wedlock, the burden of proof shifts to them. They'd have to prove fraud, not just suggest it. And if the baby's a girl? Alara asked quietly. Frost's pause was answer enough. Let's hope it's not. They left his office with more questions than answers and a bill they'd have to pay somehow. Caleb was silent on the ride home, jaw tight with frustration he couldn't direct anywhere useful. Alara watched the landscape roll past and felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter so faint she almost missed it, like a butterfly trapped under her ribs. She put her hand on her stomach and thought about the impossible arithmetic of gender, how her entire future might come down to whether this tiny growing thing had the right parts to satisfy a dead man's will and his creditor's greed. It'll be all right, Caleb said, but he didn't sound convinced. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. July arrived with drought conditions that made water scarce and tensions high. Fights broke out in town over irrigation rights. Cattle from neighboring ranches kept breaking through fences to get to the creek that ran through Alara's land. She was 4 months along now, showing enough that there was no hiding it, and everywhere she went people stared at her belly like they were trying to calculate due dates and conception timelines. The Hales' lawyers came back twice more, asking new questions, demanding to see household records, interviewing Jesse about his observations of Alara and Caleb's relationship. The boy held up well under questioning, stating plainly that they seemed like any married couple to him, worked together, ate together, slept in the same bed as far as he knew. It wasn't romantic testimony, but it was honest. Then Dale Morrison got drunk one night and started telling anyone who'd listen that Alara had offered him money to father a child before she'd married Caleb. The story had changed in the telling. Now she'd supposedly offered herself to multiple men, desperate and willing to do anything to secure an heir. Caleb heard about it from Jesse, who'd been in town picking up supplies when Morrison started running his mouth. He came back to the ranch, told Caleb what had been said, and watched the older man's face go from neutral to dangerous. I'm going to kill him, Caleb said quietly. Alara, who'd been sitting on the porch trying to stay cool, struggled to her feet. You're not. He's destroying your reputation. My reputation's already destroyed. Killing him won't fix it. It'll make me feel better. And it'll land you in jail, which helps exactly nothing. She crossed to him and put both hands on his chest, feeling his heart hammering. He's a drunk and a liar. Everyone knows it. Not everyone. Some people believe him. Then those people were never going to be on our side anyway. She looked up at him, this man who'd become her husband and her partner, and something else she was afraid to name. We win by surviving, by having this baby and keeping the ranch and proving them all wrong, not by you getting arrested for assault. He covered her hands with his, and some of the tension bled out of his shoulders. I hate this. I hate watching them tear you apart and not being able to stop it. I know, but you can't fight every battle with your fists. I can fight this one. No, you can't. She squeezed his hands. Promise me you won't go after him. He looked away, jaw working. Alara, promise me. Fine, I promise. But if he comes near you, all bets are off. It was the best she was going to get. She let it drop and went back to the porch, where the evening air was marginally cooler than inside the house. Her back ached constantly now. Her feet swelled. The baby moved regularly, kicks and rolls that were becoming stronger, more insistent. Dr. Wells said everything looked normal, but normal didn't mean safe. Normal didn't guarantee anything. August came in hot and mean, and the hearing date loomed like a storm on the horizon. Frost prepared them as best he could, walking them through likely questions, rehearsing testimony, explaining courtroom procedure. The hearing would be in front of Judge Theodore Markham, a man known for his rigid interpretation of the law and his general disapproval of women in business. He's not going to be sympathetic, Frost warned. He thinks women should be wives and mothers, not property owners. The fact that you're trying to hold on to a ranch as a widow won't win you any favor. What will win favor? Alara asked. Proof. Documentation. Witnesses who can't be impeached, and honestly, a male child born healthy and legitimate. That's your strongest argument. Physical proof that the will's conditions have been met. The baby's not due until late September. I'm aware, which is why this hearing is so dangerous. If Markham rules against you before the child is born, you'll lose the ranch regardless of whether you produce an heir. The weight of it pressed down until Alara couldn't breathe properly. They could do everything right and still lose. The judge could decide their marriage was fraudulent based on nothing but timing and
This
suspicion.
story was posted
The
on the
Hales could
channel
win
The
without
Rusty
proving
Saddle.
anything,
Please do not
just by
repost it
creating
in any
enough doubt.
form.
There has to be something else we can do, Caleb said. There is. You show up to that hearing and you tell the truth. You make the judge see that your marriage is real, that your relationship is genuine, that you're not trying to defraud anyone. You be so honest and forthright that there's no room for doubt. And if that's not enough? Frost didn't have an answer for that. The hearing was set for August 23rd. Alara was 7 months pregnant by then, moving slowly, tiring easily, but determined to be present for every minute of the proceedings. They rode into town the night before and stayed at Lorna's boarding house, in a room that felt too small and too exposed. Alara barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of losing everything. The courtroom was packed. Apparently watching a pregnant widow fight for her land was entertainment worth canceling other plans for. Alara sat at the defendant's table with Caleb beside her and Frost on her other side, facing Judge Markham's elevated bench and the Hales' legal team spread across the plaintiff's table like an invading force. Gideon sat with his father in the front row of spectators, both of them dressed like they were attending a business meeting in San Francisco instead of a territorial courtroom. Harold Hale was 60, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile genuinely. He looked at Alara like she was a problem that needed solving, nothing more. Markham called the court to order, and the hearing began. The Hales' lead attorney, a man named Whitmore with a voice like gravel, laid out their case with clinical precision. He presented the will. He detailed the timeline of Thomas Quinn's death and Alara's subsequent marriage. He called it suspiciously convenient that Mrs. Quinn had married her employee mere months before the deadline, after failing to secure a husband through more traditional means. "We will demonstrate, Isai," Whitmore said, "that this marriage is a sham, a legal fiction created solely to circumvent the clear intent of Mr. Thomas Quinn's will. We will show that the defendant and Mr. Reed had no romantic relationship prior to the marriage, that they lived and worked together as employer and employee, and that the marriage was entered into with fraudulent intent." He called his first witness. Martha Simmons took the stand, looking pleased to be there, and Alara's stomach sank. Whitmore walked Martha through a series of questions about Alara's relationship with Caleb before the marriage. Had she ever seen them in romantic situations? No. Had they appeared to have any relationship beyond professional? Not that Martha had witnessed. Had Alara seemed desperate to find a husband as the deadline approached? "Oh, yes," Martha said with relish. "She tried everything, matrimonial agencies. Even approached several local men, though they all declined." "Objection," Frost said, standing. "Hearsay." "Sustained," Markham said without enthusiasm. But the damage was done. Whitmore continued, drawing out testimony designed to paint Alara as desperate and Caleb as opportunistic. When Frost cross-examined, Martha held firm, adding that she'd always thought it odd how quickly the relationship had developed. "One day he was hired help," Martha said. "Next day he's a husband. Seems convenient, doesn't it?" 2 more witnesses followed. Neighbors who testified to seeing Caleb sleeping in the barn before the marriage. Townspeople who'd observed the couple's interactions and found them professional rather than romantic. Each testimony chipped away at their credibility, and Alara felt the case slipping away like water through cupped hands. Then it was their turn. Frost called Reverend Shaw first, who testified to performing a lawful marriage ceremony between Alara Quinn and Caleb Reed. Yes, it had been hastily arranged. No, that wasn't unusual in frontier communities where practical concerns often drove matrimonial decisions. "Did you have any reason to believe the marriage was fraudulent?" Frost asked. "No, they took vows seriously, answered all questions honestly, seemed as committed as any couple I've married." Lorna came next. testifying that she'd seen Alara and Caleb together multiple times since the marriage, and they behaved like any married couple she'd known. They were considerate of each other. They worked together well. They seemed genuinely fond of one another. "And what about before the marriage?" Whitmore asked on cross-examination. "Did you observe this fondness then?" Lorna paused, choosing her words carefully. "I observed respect, mutual regard. Sometimes affection develops slowly. Not every marriage starts with passion. But you didn't observe affection before they married." "I didn't observe them much at all before they married. Mrs. Quinn kept to her ranch." It went on for hours. Dr. Wells testified that Alara was approximately 7 months pregnant, and the pregnancy appeared healthy. Yes, the timing was consistent with the marriage. No, she had no reason to doubt the child's paternity. "But you can't actually verify paternity, can you, doctor?" Whitmore pressed. "Not with certainty, but there's no evidence to suggest it's anyone other than Mr. Reed's child." "No evidence except the defendant's word." "Objection," Frost said sharply. "Sustained. Mr. Whitmore, stick to questions." Finally, Frost called Alara to the stand. She walked up slowly, her belly prominent, feeling every eye in the room tracking her movement. She swore to tell the truth and sat carefully in the witness chair, hands folded in her lap. Frost took her through the timeline gently. Thomas's death, the will's reading, her attempts to find a suitable husband through legitimate means, the decision to marry Caleb. "Why Mr. Reed, Watson?" Frost asked. Alara looked at Caleb, sitting at the defendant's table watching her with steady eyes. "Because I trusted him. Because he'd worked beside me for 3 years and never asked for anything he hadn't earned. Because when I needed someone, he was there." "Did you love him when you married him?" The courtroom went silent. Alara swallowed hard. "I didn't know him well enough to love him yet, but I respected him, and I thought maybe love could grow from that." "And has it?" She met Caleb's eyes again, saw everything they'd been through in the past 6 months reflected back, the fear and the fighting and the slowly built trust. "Yes." Whitmore's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every decision, every timeline, every motivation. He made her confirm that yes, she'd been desperate. Yes, the marriage had been hastily arranged. Yes, she stood to lose everything if she didn't produce an heir. "So marrying Mr. Reed was a business decision," he said. "It was a survival decision." "Which sounds very much like fraud, doesn't it, Mrs. Quinn? It sounds like a woman making the best choice available to her with the time and resources she had. A woman willing to do anything, marry anyone, to keep property she had no right to hold alone. A woman trying to keep land she'd worked and bled for from being stolen by a man who'd never set foot on it." "Objection!" Whitmore's voice rose. "Your Honor, the defendant is being argumentative." "Sustained. Mrs. Quinn, answer the questions asked." But Alara had made her point. She saw it in the faces of some of the spectators. Sympathy, understanding, recognition that maybe her choices hadn't been fraudulent, just hard. When she stepped down, her legs were shaking and her back screamed from sitting in the hard chair. Caleb reached for her hand as she passed, squeezed once, let go. The last witness was Caleb himself. He took the stand with the same steady calm he brought to everything, and Frost walked him through his version of events, his hiring, his work on the ranch, his observations of Alara as an employer and later as a wife. "Why did you agree to marry Mrs. Quinn?" Frost asked. "Because she needed help, and I could provide it." "That's all?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "No, that's not all. I'd watched her for 3 years, watched her work harder than any man I knew, watched her hold things together when everything tried to tear them apart. I admired that, respected it. When she asked me to marry her, it felt like the right thing to do." "Do you love your wife, Mr. Reed?" "Yes." "Did you love her when you married her?" Another pause. "I thought I might. Now I know I do." Whitmore tried to shake him on cross-examination, but Caleb didn't rattle easily. He answered every question with straightforward honesty, admitting the marriage had been born of necessity, but maintaining it had become something real. When asked if he'd married Alara for her land, he looked Whitmore dead in the eye and said, "I married her because she asked me to. The land was hers, still is. I'm just helping take care of it." By the time testimony concluded, afternoon had bled into evening. Judge Markham called for closing arguments. Whitmore went first, summarizing all the evidence of fraud, the timing, the previous employee relationship, the absence of romance before the marriage. He painted Alara as calculating and Caleb as opportunistic, two people who'd conspired to circumvent a legitimate will. Frost countered by pointing out that nothing they'd done was illegal. Marriage for practical reasons was common. The will required lawful marriage and a legitimate heir. Both conditions were being met.
This story
The
was
Hales were
posted on
simply
the channel
angry
The
that their
Rusty
attempt to
Saddle.
steal
Please
property
do not
through legal
repost it in any
manipulation
form.
hadn't worked. Your Honor, Frost concluded, the plaintiff wants you to punish Mrs. Quinn for being smart enough to survive an impossible situation, for finding a solution when the deck was stacked against her. But survival isn't fraud, and practical marriages aren't crimes. The law requires lawful marriage and legitimate issue. My clients have provided both. The plaintiff's case is built on resentment, not evidence. Markham listened to it all with a face that gave nothing away. When both sides finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Alara for a long moment. This court will take the matter under advisement, he said finally. I'll issue a ruling within the week. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. All they could do now was wait. They rode back to the ranch in near darkness, exhaustion settling over them like a blanket they couldn't shake off. Alara's back throbbed from hours in the hard courtroom chair, and the baby was moving restlessly, probably disturbed by her tension. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say? They'd told the truth, and now it sat in Judge Markham's hands, being weighed against legal precedent and personal prejudice and whatever mood he woke up in. Jesse had kept things running while they were gone. The animals were fed, water troughs filled, evening chores mostly done. He emerged from the barn when he heard the wagon, took one look at their faces, and wisely asked no questions. All good here? Caleb asked. Yes, sir. Nothing worth reporting. Get some rest. We'll handle the morning feeding. The boy disappeared back into the barn, and Alara let Caleb help her down from the wagon, even though she'd been climbing down from wagons on her own since she was 8 years old. Her feet hit the ground, and her knees nearly buckled. Caleb caught her elbow. Easy. I'm fine. You're not. Come on. He steered her toward the house with a hand on her back, and she was too tired to protest. Inside, he lit lamps while she sank into a chair and tried to remember when sitting down had started feeling like such a monumental relief. You need to eat something, Caleb said. I need to sleep for about 3 days. Eat first, then sleep. He put together a meal from what they had: bread, cheese, some dried meat, canned peaches that had been sitting in the pantry since Thomas was alive. Alara picked at it without much appetite while Caleb ate standing up, like sitting still might let the day's events catch up with him. What do you think he'll decide? She asked finally. I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He set his plate down. Markham's a hard man to read. Could go either way. If he rules against us before the baby's born, it's over. Even if I have a son, it won't matter. Then we appeal. With what money? We're barely paying Frost as it is. Caleb was quiet for a moment, jaw working. Then we figure something else out. We always do. But Alara could hear the strain in his voice, the weight of carrying hope when hope felt foolish. She pushed her plate away and struggled to her feet, every movement awkward with the bulk of her belly. I'm going to bed. Alara, I can't think about this anymore tonight. I just can't. She made it to the bedroom before the tears came, hot and furious and useless. She'd cried more in the past year than in her entire life before it, and she hated it, hated feeling like she was coming apart at the seams, hated the weakness of it. But the tears came anyway, and she let them fall while she undressed clumsily and pulled on her nightgown. Caleb came in while she was sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her and pulled her against his chest. She cried into his shirt until there was nothing left, until exhaustion dragged her under and sleep took her away from thinking. The week that followed was the longest of Alara's life. Every day she expected news from town, and every day nothing came. Frost had promised to ride out the moment he heard anything, but the silence stretched on. She tried to work, but Dr. Wells' warnings about overexertion kept ringing in her head, and Caleb watched her like a hawk, ready to intervene if she so much as picked up something heavier than a feed bucket. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she snapped on the third day when he took a crate of vegetables from her hands. "You're 7 months pregnant and supposed to be resting." "I've been resting. I'm going out of my mind." "Then rest differently. Read something. Knit. I don't know what women do." "This woman runs a ranch." This woman hired help specifically so she wouldn't have to run the ranch alone right now. He set the crate down and turned to face her. "I know you hate this. I know it goes against every instinct you have, but you heard what the doctor said. You want this baby to make it?" The fight drained out of her. "That's not fair." "No, but it's true." She subsided, hating that he was right, hating that her own body had become a limitation she couldn't push through. The baby kicked hard against her ribs like it was agreeing with Caleb, and she put a hand on her stomach, feeling the solid proof of why all this mattered. On the 5th day, one of the horses coliced. Caleb and Jesse worked for hours trying to save her, walking her in circles, drenching her with oil and water, doing everything they knew to do. But by evening, it was clear she wasn't going to make it. Caleb put her down mercifully, one shot behind the ear, and afterward he sat on the porch steps with his head in his hands while Jesse dealt with the carcass. Alara came out and sat beside him, lowering herself carefully. She didn't say anything, just put her hand on his shoulder and let him know she was there. "That's $300 we can't afford to lose," he said finally. "I know." "We needed her for breeding stock." "I know. Everything keeps breaking, faster than we can fix it." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat like that until the sun set and the air turned cold, and then they went inside and tried to pretend tomorrow might be better. On the 6th day, Frost came riding up the valley at a pace that suggested news. Alara was hanging laundry when she saw him, and her heart started hammering so hard she thought the baby might feel it. Caleb emerged from the barn, saw Frost, and his expression went carefully blank. The lawyer dismounted with the stiffness of someone who didn't ride much. He was carrying a leather satchel, and his face gave nothing away. "Mr. Reed, Mrs. Quinn." "What's the verdict?" Caleb asked. No preamble. Alara was grateful for that. Frost pulled papers from the satchel. "Judge Markham issued his ruling this morning. He's denying the Hales' petition to invalidate the marriage." Alara's knees went weak. She grabbed the clothesline for support. "He's denying it?" "Yes. His opinion states that while the timing of the marriage is convenient, convenience is not evidence of fraud. He finds that you entered into a lawful marriage, that witnesses testified to its legitimacy, and that the burden of proof for fraud was not met by the plaintiffs." "So we won?" "You won this round. The marriage stands. However," Frost's expression turned grave, "he's leaving the question of the heir's legitimacy open until after the birth. If you produce a son who survives the required 3 months, and if the Hales cannot prove at that time that the child is illegitimate, the ranch is yours. If you produce a daughter, or if the child doesn't survive, or if they can prove illegitimacy, the ranch goes to Gideon," Alara finished. Yes, it was a victory that felt hollow. They'd cleared one hurdle only to face a higher one. Everything still came down to the baby, its gender, its survival, its legal status. Nothing was guaranteed. "What about their ability to challenge paternity?" Caleb asked. "They can try, but it's difficult to prove without confession or clear evidence of infidelity. If you both maintain the child is yours and there's no contradicting testimony." Frost shrugged. "It's their word against yours." "Dale Morrison's already spreading lies about Alara approaching other men," Caleb said. "I'm aware, but drunk gossip isn't legal evidence. They'd need something more substantial." After Frost left, Alara and Caleb stood in the yard trying to process what the partial victory meant. They'd bought time, but time was exactly what they were running out of. The baby was due in roughly 6 weeks. 6 weeks until they'd know if this entire fight had been worth it or if they'd just prolonged the inevitable. "We should celebrate, Mike," Caleb said, but he didn't sound celebratory. "We should prepare," Alara countered. "If the baby comes early, we need to be ready." They spent the next week getting everything in order. Alara washed and folded tiny clothes she'd sewn from old sheets. Caleb built a cradle from scrap wood, Nothing fancy, but solid and safe. They stocked the pantry as much as they could afford and made sure Dr. Wells knew to come the moment labor started. The town's reaction to Markham's ruling was mixed. Some people seemed genuinely pleased that Alara had won at least partial vindication. Others were just waiting for the next chapter, the final determination of whether she'd actually keep the ranch. The betting pool shifted odds again, still favoring the Hales, but by a narrower margin. Gideon himself appeared at the ranch one afternoon, riding up alone without lawyers or his father. Alara was on the porch mending a shirt when she saw him coming. She called for Caleb, who emerged from the barn with Jesse close behind, both of them ready for trouble. "Mr. Hale," Alara said, not bothering to stand. At 8 months pregnant, standing up took effort she wasn't going to waste on him. "Mrs. Quinn, or should I continue calling you that? I understand some married women keep their names. You can call me whatever you want as long as you make it quick." He dismounted and tied his horse, taking his time with it. Up close, his expression was harder than usual, the charm stripped away to reveal frustration underneath. "I wanted to say congratulations on your legal victory. My father's quite upset about it." "I imagine so. He's not used to
This
losing."
story was posted on the
Neither am
channel
I,
The
frankly.
Rusty Saddle. Please
Gideon
do not
took a few
repost
steps
it in any
closer,
form.
and Caleb moved to intercept him. They stood maybe 10 feet apart, sizing each other up. "But this isn't over." "The judge seems to think otherwise," Alara said. "The judge postponed the inevitable. You still need a son, a legitimate son who survives. Those are steep odds. We'll manage." "Will you? Because I've been doing some research about infant mortality rates, about the percentage of male births versus female, about how many babies survive the first 3 months, especially out here where medical care is scarce." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "The numbers aren't in your favor." "Get to the point," Caleb said. "The point is that I'm willing to make you an offer, one final chance to walk away with something instead of nothing." "We're not interested," Alara said. "You haven't heard the offer." "Don't need to." Gideon's expression hardened. "My father will give you $10,000 for the ranch. Cash. Right now. You sign over the deed, we drop all legal challenges, and you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know your history." $10,000 was more money than Alara had ever seen. It was enough to buy land somewhere else, smaller but paid for. Enough to live on for years if they were careful. It was objectively a good offer for property that she might lose anyway if the baby turned out to be a girl or didn't survive. "No," she said. "Alara?" Gideon started. "No, this land is mine. I've worked it, bled on it, buried people on it. You don't get to buy it just because you have money, and I have problems." "You're being foolish." "Maybe, but it's my choice to make." Gideon looked at Caleb. "You're her husband. You could convince her." Caleb's expression was stone. "My wife makes her own decisions, and I agree with this one. Then you're both fools." Gideon untied his horse and mounted in one smooth motion. "When this goes badly, and it will go badly, remember you had a way out." He rode off at a gallop, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after he'd disappeared. Alara watched him go and tried not to think about the offer, about the safety net they'd just refused, about all the ways this could still fall apart. $10,000, Caleb said quietly. "I know. We could have been set. We will be set when we win." He came and sat beside her on the porch steps, and they watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The baby was quiet for once, and Alara put Caleb's hand on her stomach so he could feel it resting. "What if it's a girl?" she asked. "Then we love her anyway and figure out what comes next. We lose the ranch. Maybe. Or maybe we fight in court. Or maybe we take whatever money we can scrape together and start somewhere new. But we do it together." He laced his fingers through hers. "I meant what I said in the courtroom. I love you. This isn't about the land anymore. It has to be about the land. That's what all of this is for. No, it's for us, for the family we're building. The land's just dirt, Alara. You and the baby, that's what matters." She wanted to argue, wanted to say the land was more than just dirt, that it represented everything she'd fought for and refused to surrender. But sitting there with his hand on her belly and the evening settling around them, she understood what he meant. The ranch mattered, but it didn't matter more than the people trying to hold it. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the deadline looming like a physical presence. Alara was enormous, uncomfortable, and increasingly anxious. Every twinge made her wonder if it was starting. Every ache could be the beginning of labor. Dr. Wells came out to check on her twice in the first week of September, pronouncing everything normal but warning that first babies often came late. Late? Alara stared at her. I can't afford late. The deadline is September 14th. Babies don't care about deadlines. They come when they're ready. This one needs to be ready soon. Dr. Wells packed her bag with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd had this conversation before. Walking helps sometimes, and staying calm. Stress isn't good for labor. Staying calm, Alara repeated. Right. I'll just calmly ignore the fact that my entire future depends on this baby's timing and gender. I know it's hard, but worrying won't change anything. Your body will do what it's going to do. After Wells left, Alara took her advice about walking. She walked the perimeter of the yard. She walked to the barn and back. She walked until her back ached and her feet swelled, and Caleb made her sit down before she collapsed. The baby shifted lower, pressing on everything, making it hard to breathe properly. September 10th came and went. 11th, 12th. The deadline was closing in like walls narrowing, and still nothing happened. Alara's anxiety ratcheted higher. What if the baby didn't come in time? What if it came on the 15th, one day too late, and Markham ruled that the condition hadn't been met? On the 13th, Alara woke before dawn with an ache in her lower back that felt different from the usual pregnancy discomfort. She lay still, trying to decide if this was something or just more of the same. The ache intensified, wrapped around to her belly, held for a long moment, then released. She counted. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Caleb, she said. He was already half awake, attuned to her movements after months of sleeping beside her. What's wrong? I think it's starting. He was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she'd finished the sentence. How far apart? 20 minutes, maybe. I've only had 2. I'll get Jesse to fetch the doctor. You stay here. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her forehead, quick and hard, and disappeared. She heard him talking to Jesse, heard the boy riding off at speed toward town. Then Caleb was back, helping her sit up, asking what she needed. I don't know. I've never done this before. Right, okay. Wells said to time the contractions. And keep you comfortable. Comfortable? Alara laughed, sharp and slightly hysterical. Sure. The contractions came every 20 minutes for the next 2 hours. Then 15, then 12. They weren't terrible yet, just insistent, like someone pulling a rope tighter and tighter around her middle. She could breathe through them, could walk between them, could even talk. Dr. Wells arrived around mid-morning, took one look at Alara, and started organizing. She sent Caleb to boil water and find clean sheets. She examined Alara with practiced efficiency and declared her about 4 fingers dilated, which apparently meant they had a ways to go yet. First babies take their time, Wells said. Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow. Tomorrow's the 14th, the deadline. I know. Let's hope the baby knows too. The afternoon wore on in a blur of contractions that grew closer and stronger. Alara walked when she could and rested when she couldn't. She drank water that came back up. She tried to eat and couldn't. The pain was building into something that demanded all her attention, wiping away everything else. By evening, the contractions were 5 minutes apart and strong enough to make her cry out. Caleb held her hand and let her squeeze until his fingers went white. Between contractions, he wiped her face with a cool cloth and told her she was doing great, even though they both knew she was just enduring. Night fell. The pain kept intensifying. Somewhere around midnight, Wells examined her again and said she was fully dilated and it was time to push. The next hours blurred into a nightmare of pain and effort and screaming that Alara couldn't contain. She pushed until she thought she'd break apart. Wells coached her through it with matter-of-fact instructions that seemed impossibly calm given what was happening. Caleb stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand, bracing her back, whispering encouragement she barely heard over the roaring in her own ears. The pain was everything. It consumed thought and time and reality until there was nothing but the imperative to push, to get this child out, to survive. Somewhere in the darkest part of night, when Alara was certain she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't survive another contraction, Wells said, "I can see the head. One more push. Give me everything you have." Alara bore down with strength she didn't know she possessed, and the baby slid free in a rush that left her gasping and shaking. For one terrible moment, there was silence. Then a thin, angry wail split the air, and Wells was laughing. "It's a boy," she said. "You have a son." The words didn't make sense at first. Alara was too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too emptied out to process anything beyond the fact that the pain was stopping. Then Wells was placing a tiny, bloody, squalling thing on her chest, and Alara looked down at her son. He was perfect, impossibly small and red and furious, but perfect. She put her hands on him, feeling the warmth of him, the solidness, the realness. He was here. He'd made it. They'd made it. "Is he okay?" Her voice came out raspy. "He's perfect. Strong lungs, good color, all the right parts in the right places." Wells was busy with something Alara couldn't see and didn't care about. Born at 3:47 in the morning on September 14th, you made your deadline with hours to spare. Caleb was crying. Alara looked up and saw tears streaming down his face as he stared at the baby like he couldn't quite believe it was real. She reached for his hand and pulled him closer. "Say hello to your son." He touched the baby's head with one finger, gentle as anything. "Hello." The baby stopped crying and seemed to focus on Caleb's voice, which was impossible since newborns couldn't see properly, but Alara swore he did it anyway. For a moment, the three of them existed in a bubble of exhausted peace, and nothing else mattered. Then Wells was cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket and doing all the practical things that needed doing. She handed him back to Alara cleaned and swaddled, and Alara held him against her chest, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her skin. "What will you name him?" Wells asked. Alara looked at Caleb. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't wanted to jinx anything by planning too far ahead. But looking at their son's scrunched-up face, one name felt right. "Thomas," she said, "after his grandfather, but we'll call him Tommy." "Thomas Reed." "Thomas Quinn Reed," Caleb said, "so nobody can question which family he belongs to." Wells made notes in her book. "I'll file the birth record today. September 14th, born to Alara Quinn and Caleb Reed. One healthy, male heir, right on schedule." The morning light was starting to filter through the windows when Wells finally left, promising to return in a few days to check on them. Jesse had been waiting anxiously in the barn, and Caleb went to tell him the news. Alara was left alone with Tommy, who'd fallen asleep in her arms with the absolute peace of someone who didn't know he'd just saved his mother's entire world. She should sleep. She was exhausted beyond reason. But she couldn't stop looking at him, counting his fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of his tiny ears and the dark hair that covered his head. He was here. He was real. He was hers. When Caleb came back, he climbed into bed beside her carefully, and they lay there together with Tommy between them, watching him sleep. "We did it," Alara whispered. "You did it. We. This was always we." He kissed her forehead, and they drifted off to sleep just as the sun rose fully over the valley, painting everything in gold. But the celebration was short-lived. Alara woke a few hours later to pounding on the door. Caleb answered it to find Gideon Hale standing on the porch with Porter and Weeks flanking him like guards. "I'm here to verify the birth," Gideon said. Caleb blocked the doorway. "You're not coming in. The court order says I have the right to verify that a male child was born. I'll need to see the baby and the birth record. Come back later. My wife just gave birth. She needs rest." "I'm not leaving until I've verified." "Let him in," Alara called from the bedroom. Her voice was rough from screaming, but it carried. "Let's get this over with." Caleb reluctantly stepped aside. Gideon entered with his lawyers, and they crowded into the small house like invaders. Alara sat up in bed, holding Tommy protectively against her chest. She'd put on a clean nightgown, and someone, Caleb probably, had changed the sheets, but she still looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd just survived childbirth. Gideon stared at the baby for a long moment. Something complicated crossed his face. Defeat, maybe, or just disappointment that his meal ticket had evaporated. A son, he said flatly. Born at 3:47 this morning, September 14th, Dr. Wells has the record. Porter stepped forward. We'll need to verify the record, and we reserve the right to challenge paternity. On what grounds? Caleb's voice was dangerous. You going to call my wife a liar to her face while she's holding our son? We're simply protecting our client's interests. Your client has no interest here anymore. The will's conditions have been met. Lawful marriage, male heir born within the year. He's been alive for... Caleb checked the clock on the wall. 7 hours. In 3 months, this is done. Gideon's jaw tightened. We'll see what the judge says. The judge will say the same thing we're saying. You lost. Accept it and leave. For a moment, it seemed like Gideon might push back, might demand something more. But he just looked at Alara holding Tommy, at Caleb standing like a wall between them, at the stubborn refusal in both their faces. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is, Alara said. You're just too stubborn to admit it. They left, and the house felt larger without their hostile presence filling it. Caleb locked the door behind them and came back to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. 3 more months, he said. 3 more months, Alara agreed. And then we're done. Tommy chose that moment to wake up and start crying, and Alara brought him to her breast to feed. He latched on after some fumbling, and she felt her body responding to him in ways that were instinctive and strange. This was her son, her heir. The answer to an impossible problem and the beginning of something new. Caleb watched them with an expression that was soft and fierce simultaneously. I'm going to protect you both, he said. Whatever it takes. I know. I mean it. They try anything, and I know. She reached for his hand. But right now, we just need to survive the next 3 months. Keep Tommy healthy, keep the ranch running, show the judge we've met every condition. And then? And then we live, really live, without deadlines or threats or impossible conditions. Just us and our family and the land we fought for. It sounded simple when she said it like that, but Alara knew better than to think the next 3 months would be easy. The Hales would be watching for any sign of weakness, any excuse to challenge Tommy's legitimacy or health. They'd have to be perfect, or at least appear perfect, until the deadline passed and the ranch was irrevocably theirs. But looking at her son's face, feeling Caleb's hand warm in hers, Alara thought maybe they could do it. They'd survived everything else. Survived loss and desperation and legal battles and childbirth. What was 3 more months of holding on when they'd already come this far? Tommy finished feeding and fell back asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful. Alara settled him in the cradle Caleb had built, watching his tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. Every breath was a victory. Every day he survived brought them closer to security. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and life on the ranch continued. There were animals to feed and fences to mend, and 1,000 small tasks that didn't care about births or legal deadlines. But for just this moment, Alara let herself rest, let herself feel the accomplishment of having done the impossible. She'd produced an heir, against all odds, against time itself. She'd brought a son into the world exactly when she needed to. Now all that remained was keeping him alive and keeping the Hales at bay until the law finally irrevocably declared the ranch hers. 3 months. She could survive 3 months. She had to. The first week with Tommy was the hardest thing Alara had ever done, and she'd done plenty of hard things. The baby cried constantly, hungry, wet, uncomfortable, or just because that's what babies did. She was healing from the birth, exhausted beyond measure, and running on maybe 2 hours of sleep scattered across each 24-hour period. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, and every movement reminded her of what she'd been through. Caleb helped where he could. He changed diapers and walked Tommy around the house at 3 in the morning and brought Alara food she was too tired to eat. But there were some things only she could do, and nursing was one of them. Tommy fed every 2 hours like clockwork, and by the fourth day, Alara was ready to cry from exhaustion alone. "You need to sleep," Caleb said, finding her in the rocking chair at dawn with Tommy at her breast and tears streaming down her face. "I can't. He needs to eat." "He just ate an hour ago. And he'll need to eat again in an hour. That's how this works." Caleb crouched in front of her, and his face was worried in the gray morning light. "You're going to make yourself sick. I'm already sick. I'm exhausted, and everything hurts, and I can't remember what it feels like to sleep for more than 30 minutes at a time." She wiped at her face angrily. "And I can't complain because we need him healthy. We need him to survive 3 more months, or this was all for nothing." "It's not for nothing. He's our son. He's also our proof, our evidence, the only thing standing between us and losing everything." Tommy finished nursing, and she lifted him to her shoulder to burp him, patting his tiny back with automatic movements. "I can't afford to fail him." "You're not failing him. You're keeping him alive and fed and loved. That's all you can do." But it didn't feel like enough. Every time Tommy coughed or seemed too warm or didn't wake up when he usually would, Alara's mind went to dark places. Babies died all the time out here. Disease, accidents, mysterious failures to thrive that no one could explain. She'd lost one before. What made her think this one was guaranteed to survive? Dr. Wells came to check on them at the end of the first week and pronounced Tommy healthy and thriving despite his mother's anxiety. "He's gained weight, his color is good, he's feeding well and producing appropriate output. Stop worrying." Easy for you to say. "I know it's hard, but babies are tougher than they look. He's doing fine." After Wells left, Lorna stopped by with a basket of food and practical sympathy. She took one look at Alara and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you. That's very comforting." "I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to tell you the truth, which is that you need to take care of yourself or you won't be able to take care of him." Lorna started unpacking the basket. Bread, stew, preserves, things that could be eaten without effort. "When's the last time you ate a full meal?" "I don't remember." "That's what I thought. Caleb?" He appeared from wherever he'd been working. "Ma'am? Make sure your wife eats this entire bowl of stew. I don't care if you have to feed her yourself. She's wasting away." "I've been trying. Try harder." But Lorna's tone was kind. She looked at Tommy sleeping in his cradle, and her expression softened. "He's beautiful. Looks like his father." "Which one?" Alara asked without thinking. "The one raising him. That's what matters." It was the first time anyone had directly acknowledged the question of Tommy's paternity outside a courtroom, and Alara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just survive the next 3 months. That's all you need to do." The second week was marginally better. Tommy settled into something resembling a schedule, and Alara learned to sleep when he slept, instead of trying to use those precious moments to catch up on everything else. Caleb took over more of the household tasks, and Jesse handled the ranch work with increasing competence. They were managing. Barely, but managing. Then Gideon came back. He arrived on a Tuesday morning with Porter and Weeks in tow, plus a man Alara didn't recognize, older, official-looking, carrying a leather case that suggested authority. "Mrs. Quinn," Gideon said when she answered the door with Tommy in her arms. "This is Dr. Raymond Hatch. He's a physician from Denver, here at the court's request to examine the child and verify his health." Alara's arms tightened around Tommy protectively. "Dr. Wells already examined him." "Dr. Wells is a local practitioner. The court wants an independent assessment from someone with more extensive credentials." Gideon's smile was cold. "Surely you have no objection to ensuring your son is healthy." Caleb appeared behind Alara. "We have every objection to you showing up unannounced and demanding access to our child." "It's not a demand. It's a court order." Porter handed over papers. "Judge Markham wants verification that the child is thriving before he issues his final ruling." Caleb scanned the papers and his jaw tightened. "This says the examination has to happen within 24 hours of delivery of the order, which we delivered 5 minutes ago, so Dr. Hatch will need to examine the child now." It was a trap, carefully constructed to catch them off guard. Refuse, and they'd be in contempt of court. Comply, and they'd be letting a stranger hired by their enemies handle their newborn son. Alara looked at Caleb, saw the fury in his face, and made a decision. Fine, but Dr. Wells will be present, and the examination happens here, not anywhere else. Agreed, Dr. Hatch said, speaking for the first time. His voice was measured, professional. I just need adequate light and a clean surface to work on. They set up in the kitchen with lamps brought close and a clean blanket spread on the table. Caleb rode to fetch Dr. Wells while Alara waited with Tommy and their unwanted guests. Gideon and his lawyers stood against the wall like judges, watching everything. Dr. Hatch prepared his instruments with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. When Wells arrived, breathless from the hurried ride, she took one look at the setup and her expression turned thunderous. This is highly irregular. It's also court-ordered, Porter said. Then let's get it over with. Alara undressed Tommy on the table, and he immediately started crying from the cold and the unfamiliar hands. Dr. Hatch examined him methodically, listening to his heart and lungs, checking his reflexes, measuring his length and head circumference, inspecting every inch of him for any sign of defect or illness. Wells watched like a hawk, ready to intervene if anything seemed wrong. Well? Gideon asked when Hatch finally finished. The child appears healthy, normal weight and length for his age, no obvious abnormalities or concerns. Heart and lungs sound clear, reflexes appropriate. He made notes in a small book. I'll file my report with the court. And the question of paternity? Porter asked. Hatch looked at him with something like distaste. I'm a physician, not a fortune teller. I can verify the child's health, not his parentage. If you want that information, you'll need to find another way to get it. After they left, Alara collapsed into a chair with Tommy clutched against her chest. She was shaking, and not from cold. The violation of having strangers examine her son, of being forced to comply with court orders in her own home, of knowing the Hales were still looking for any crack to exploit, it was too much. They're not going to stop, she said. They will. In 3 months, when the deadline passes and there's nothing left to challenge. Caleb paced the kitchen like a caged animal. We just have to hold on. But holding on was getting harder. News of Dr. Hatch's examination spread through town within hours, spawning new speculation about whether Tommy was really Caleb's son or if Alara had been unfaithful. Dale Morrison, emboldened by alcohol and his own lies, started telling anyone who'd listen that he'd been with Alara, that the baby might be his. Caleb heard about it from Jesse and went into town before Alara could stop him. She only knew what happened afterward, pieced together from Jesse's anxious report and Lorna's more detailed account. Caleb found Morrison in the saloon and dragged him outside into the street. What followed was brief and brutal. Morrison got in maybe 2 punches before Caleb put him on the ground and kept him there, hitting him until his knuckles split and Morrison's face was a bloody mess. Say your name again, Caleb said, his voice carrying to the crowd that had gathered. Say anything about my wife or my son, and I'll finish what I started. The sheriff arrested Caleb for assault. Alara got the news from Lorna, who rode out to the ranch in a hurry to tell her before someone less kind could. She arrived to find Alara nursing Tommy and Jesse hovering anxiously in the doorway. Your husband's in jail, Lorna said without preamble. Alara's stomach dropped. What happened? Lorna explained. The confrontation, the beating, the arrest. Morrison deserved every bit of it, but that doesn't make it legal. Sheriff's holding Caleb until bail is posted or Judge Markham decides what to do with him. How much is bail? $50. $50 they didn't have. Alara looked around the kitchen at their meager possessions, calculating what could be sold quickly. The gray mare, she's worth at least that. I'll buy her, Lorna said immediately. $60. You'll need the extra for legal fees. You don't need a horse. No, but you need your husband out of jail before the Hales use this against you. Lorna's expression was fierce. Take the money. Get him out. We'll sort the rest later. By evening, Caleb was home. His knuckles were bandaged, his face bruised where Morrison had landed a lucky punch, and he looked tired in a way that went bone deep. Alara sent Jesse to the barn and faced her husband across the kitchen table. You promised you wouldn't go after him. I lied. You got arrested. It was worth it. Was it? Because now the Hales have more ammunition. They can say you're violent. They can paint you as unstable. They can use this to challenge everything. Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You gave them exactly what they wanted. I gave Morrison what he deserved, him and everyone else spreading lies about you. Caleb's voice was hard. I won't apologize for defending your honor. Well, my honor doesn't matter if we lose the ranch. It matters to me. They stared at each other across the table, anger and exhaustion and fear all tangled together until neither knew where one ended and another began. Tommy started crying from the bedroom, and Alara went to get him, leaving Caleb sitting alone with his bloodied hands and his righteous fury. The assault charge went before Judge Markham 3 days later. Morrison showed up with his face still swollen and gave testimony that was half lies and half exaggeration. Caleb admitted to hitting him but maintained it was justified given Morrison's slander. Markham listened to both sides and looked deeply annoyed with everyone involved. Mr. Reed, you cannot assault people, regardless of provocation. However, Mr. Morrison, you also cannot spread malicious lies about respectable women without consequence. He banged his gavel. Mr. Reed, you're fined $25 for assault. Mr. Morrison, you're fined $50 for public slander and disturbing the peace. And both of you stay away from each other, or I'll throw you both in jail for a month. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Outside the courthouse, Gideon was waiting. He watched Caleb and Alara walk past with Tommy bundled against the cold, and his expression was calculating. Enjoying your victory? He called. Caleb kept walking, but Alara stopped. What do you want now? Just making observations. Your husband has a violent temper. Your marriage is clearly under strain. The baby's only 3 weeks old and you already look like you're falling apart. He stepped closer. My offer still stands. $10,000 for the ranch. Walk away while you can still do it with some dignity and tact. We're not interested. You should be. Because even if you make it to the 3-month mark, I'm going to challenge the legitimacy of that child. I'm going to bring witnesses who'll testify to your questionable behavior. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Caleb turned back and Alara could see him struggling to control himself. You're done talking. Walk away. Or what? You'll assault me too? Please do. It'll just prove my point. Alara put her hand on Caleb's arm before he could do something stupid. Come on! He's not worth it! They left Gideon standing there, and Alara could feel his eyes on them all the way to the wagon. The fight was taking its toll. She could see it in Caleb's face, in the tension that never left his shoulders, in the way he looked at Tommy like he was afraid someone would take him away. October wore on with cold settling in and Tommy growing despite the chaos around him. He was 6 weeks old when Dr. Wells came for another checkup and declared him healthy and developing normally. 8 weeks old when he started smiling, real smiles, not just gas, and Alara felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost painful. She was changing his diaper one morning when she noticed something strange, a rash on his stomach, red and angry looking. She called for Caleb, who took one look and rode immediately for Dr. Wells. The doctor arrived within 2 hours and examined Tommy thoroughly. The rash was spreading, and he'd developed a fever. Wells's face was grave as she checked his temperature and listened to his breathing. It could be a simple infection, or it could be something more serious. I'll need to monitor him closely. How serious? Alara's voice came out strangled. I don't know yet. Keep him cool. Try to get fluids into him through nursing. If the fever spikes, or he stops breathing well, send for me immediately. The next 3 days were the longest of Alara's life. Tommy's fever climbed and fell and climbed again. The rash spread across his chest and back. He cried weakly when he had the energy and lay too still when he didn't. Alara didn't sleep, didn't eat, just held him and tried to will him better through sheer force of love. Dr. Wells came twice a day. She brought medicines that helped marginally and advice that Alara followed desperately. Caleb paced and prayed to anything that might be listening and looked like he might break apart from helplessness. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Tommy's temperature dropped to normal and stayed there. The rash started fading. He nursed with renewed energy and slept peacefully for the first time in days. Wells examined him and actually smiled. He's going to be fine. Whatever it was, he fought it off. Alara cried from relief so profound it felt like drowning. She held Tommy against her chest and felt his steady heartbeat and let herself believe, for the first time in days, that they might actually survive this. But the illness had cost them time and energy they couldn't spare. The ranch work had fallen behind, bills were piling up. And the deadline was approaching, December 14th, 3 months after Tommy's birth, when the will's final condition would either be met or fail. 2 weeks before the deadline, Harold Hale himself came to the ranch. Not Gideon, not the lawyers, but the old man himself, riding up in a carriage that looked absurdly formal against the rough ranch yard. Alara met him on the porch with Caleb beside her and Tommy in her arms. She'd learned to keep the baby close during confrontations. He was her shield and her proof. "Mr. Hale," she said, "this is unexpected." Harold climbed down from the carriage with the careful movements of someone whose body didn't work as well as it used to. Up close, he looked older than his 60 years, worn down by something that might have been illness or might just been the weight of being the kind of man who'd loan money with impossible conditions attached. "Mrs. Quinn, Mr. Reed." He removed his hat. "May we speak plainly? That's all we've been doing. Then let me be direct. I'm here to concede." The words hung in the air like something impossible. Alara looked at Caleb, who looked equally stunned. "Concede what?" Caleb asked. "The fight over the ranch, the legal challenges, all of it." Harold's voice was rough. "You've met the will's conditions. You have a legitimate male heir born in lawful wedlock. He survived nearly 3 months. You've won." "Why are you telling us this?" Alara asked suspiciously. "Because my son wants to keep fighting. Wants to challenge the boy's paternity in court, drag this out for years, make your life hell until you give up from exhaustion." Harold looked at Tommy, and something complicated crossed his face. "I'm tired. I'm sick. The doctors say I've got maybe a year left. And I don't want to spend what time I have left trying to steal land from a woman who's fought harder for it than my son ever would." "Gideon won't be happy about this," Caleb said. "Gideon's never been happy about anything. But he'll do what I tell him as long as I'm alive, and after I'm gone, it won't matter anyway." Harold produced papers from his coat. "This is a legal release. My lawyers drafted it. It states that I acknowledge you've met all conditions of Thomas Quinn's will and that I release any and all claims to the property. Sign it, and this is over." Alara took the papers with shaking hands. She read through them carefully, looking for traps, but they seemed straightforward. A complete release of all claims, no tricks hidden in legal language. "Why?" she asked. "Why now?" Harold was quiet for a moment, looking out at the valley and the ranch buildings, and the land that had been the center of so much conflict. "Because Thomas was my friend before he was my debtor. We grew up together, worked together, built this town together. When he came to me for that loan, I should have just given him the money. But I saw an opportunity, and I took it. Put conditions in his will that I knew would be nearly impossible to meet. Thought Gideon could use the land, make something of himself." "But," Alara prompted, "but watching you fight for it showed me what Thomas saw in you. You're stronger than he was. Smarter than Gideon. You've earned this land in ways that have nothing to do with inheritance or debt." He looked at her directly. "Thomas loved you. He should have trusted you to hold the ranch without impossible conditions. I'm correcting his mistake." Alara felt tears threatening again. She'd cried more in the past year than in her entire life before it, and she was tired of crying, but this felt different. Not grief or fear, but something like closure. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. I'm just doing what should have been done a year ago." Harold climbed back into his carriage. "File those papers with the court. Judge Markham will issue the final ruling and the ranch will be yours. Truly yours, with no conditions left to meet." He left, and Alara stood on the porch holding the papers, and Tommy, and feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. It was over. Actually over. They'd won. Caleb read through the papers again, checking every line, and then he looked at her with something like awe. "We did it. We did. The ranch is ours. Yes." They filed the papers the next day. Judge Markham reviewed them, confirmed their validity, and issued his final ruling. The ranch was legally transferred to Alara Quinn Reed, free and clear of all conditions and encumbrances. The Hale family's claims were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't be refiled. It was done. The news spread through Collier's Bend within hours. Some people seemed genuinely happy for Alara. Others were disappointed that the drama had ended without the spectacular failure they'd been waiting for. Martha Simmons sniffed and said it was a shame the law had been manipulated so thoroughly, but most people just accepted it and moved on, because frontier towns didn't have time for holding grudges when there was work to be done. December 14th arrived, the official 3-month deadline, and passed without incident. Tommy was healthy and growing. The ranch was legally secure, and for the first time in over a year, Alara woke up without the weight of impossible conditions pressing down on her. Christmas came quietly. They couldn't afford much, but Caleb carved a wooden horse for Tommy, even though he was too young to appreciate it, and Alara made a small feast from what they had. Jesse joined them for dinner, and Lorna stopped by with gifts, practical things like warm socks and preserves, but given with the kind of affection that made them precious. "You did it," Lorna said, holding Tommy while Alara carved the roast. "You actually did it." "We did it," Alara corrected. "Everyone who helped, everyone who testified, everyone who believed we could." Most people didn't believe, but you proved them wrong anyway. After Lorna left, Alara and Caleb sat in front of the fire with Tommy between them, watching the flames dance and feeling the peace of having survived. Outside, snow was falling in soft flakes that covered everything in white. Inside, it was warm and safe, and theirs. "What happens now?" Caleb asked. "Now we live, we work the ranch, we raise our son, we figure out how to be a real family instead of just survivors." Sounds simple when you say it like that. It won't be simple. Nothing ever is. But it'll be ours. She looked at him, this man who'd married her out of loyalty and stayed out of love. No more deadlines, no more conditions, just us deciding what comes next. "I like the sound of that." Tommy stirred and made a small noise, and they both looked down at him with the kind of fierce protectiveness that came from having fought so hard to keep him. He was 3 months old now, thriving despite everything that had tried to prevent his existence. He didn't know that he'd saved his mother's land just by being born. He didn't know about wills and conditions and legal battles. He just knew he was warm and fed and loved. Alara picked him up and held him close, breathing in the baby smell of him and feeling the solid weight of him in her arms. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the land, though that mattered. Not just the freedom from the Hale's threats, though that was sweet. But this, the ability to hold her son in her own house on her own land and know that no one could take it away. The fire crackled and settled. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the valley in quiet. Alara leaned against Caleb's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and steady and permanent. January brought new challenges. A hard freeze that burst pipes, sick cattle that needed round-the-clock care, bills that still needed paying. But they faced them together, as partners who'd learned to trust each other in the deepest ways. The ranch work was brutal and endless, but it was theirs. Every fence they mended, every calf they saved, every acre they improved, it all belonged to them now. By spring, Tommy was sitting up and grabbing at everything within reach. He laughed when Caleb tossed him in the air and settled contentedly in Alara's arms when he was tired. He was growing into his own person, stubborn and curious and completely unaware of the impossible circumstances of his birth. One evening in March, Alara found Caleb in the barn working on a new project. He'd been secretive about it for weeks, disappearing for hours to work on something he wouldn't explain. She discovered him carving a sign, letters painstakingly cut into a board of aged wood. "What's that?" she asked. He looked up, caught, and something sheepish crossed his face. "A new sign for the ranch. We already have a sign," the broken spoke. "I know, but I thought maybe we could change it, make it something that's ours, not just something Thomas named." He held up the board so she could see the letters, Quinn Ranch. Alara felt her throat tighten. "That's my name. It's our name, yours and mine and Tommy's. I know the ranch was yours before I came along, and I don't want to erase that, but I thought maybe we could claim it together, if you want." She crossed to him and took his face in her hands and kissed him hard. When she pulled back, he was smiling in the way he did when he was surprised but pleased. "Yes," she said, "let's put up the new sign." They hung it the next day, replacing the old weather-beaten broken spoke marker with the new one. Quinn Ranch. Simple and true and theirs. The town adjusted to the new reality slowly. Alara was no longer a widow desperately clinging to land she had no right to hold. She was a ranch owner, a wife, a mother. People who'd written her off found reasons to be friendly again. Business that had been denied her suddenly became available. It was galling how quickly allegiance shifted, but Alara had learned to pick her battles. And this wasn't one worth fighting. Gideon left town that spring. Word was he'd taken a position with a mining company in Colorado, leaving Collier's Bend and his father's shadow behind. Harold died in June, quietly in his sleep, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. Alara went because it felt like the right thing to do, standing at the edge of the cemetery with Caleb beside her and paying respects to the man who'd tried to take everything and ended up giving it back. By Tommy's first birthday, the ranch was profitable again. Not wealthy, but stable. They'd hired permanent help, 2 good men who worked hard and didn't ask questions about the past. The cattle were thriving. The land was producing. And for the first time in years, Alara could look at the ledgers without her stomach turning. They celebrated Tommy's birthday with a small party, just family and close friends, cake that Lorna baked, and gifts that were mostly practical. Tommy destroyed his slice of cake with the gleeful abandon of a 1-year-old, getting it everywhere and laughing at the mess. Watching him, Alara felt a contentment she'd never expected to find. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, coming to stand beside her. "That we survived. Against odds that should have destroyed us, we survived. More than survived. We won." "Did we?" She looked around at their small gathering, at the house that was shabby but solid, at the land that stretched out in all directions under a sky that went on forever. "Sometimes I think we just got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for this. Every single day, you fought." "We fought," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not, but you would have tried." He put his arm around her waist. "That's what I love about you. You don't know how to quit." She leaned into him, watching Tommy demolish his cake with Lorna's help, and thought about the past year and a half. About impossible deadlines and desperate choices, and the slow building of something real from the ruins of necessity. They'd started as employer and employee, become husband and wife through transaction, and somehow, improbably, ended up as partners in the truest sense. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Hard work and long days, but punctuated by small joys, Tommy's first steps, a successful calving season, evenings on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. Alara learned to let Caleb carry some of the weight instead of shouldering everything herself. He learned that she needed to feel useful even when she was supposed to be resting. They figured out marriage through trial and error, through fights and reconciliations and the gradual understanding that came from choosing each other every day. The town's memory proved short. Within 2 years, most people had forgotten the scandal of Alara's desperate search for a husband. She was just another ranch owner, respected for her work ethic and her ability to turn a profit in lean years. The fact that she was a woman became unremarkable. The fact that her marriage had started as a business arrangement faded into irrelevance. What remained was the land and the family they'd built on it, and the knowledge that sometimes survival required doing the impossible, and sometimes, if you were stubborn enough and lucky enough and brave enough, the impossible became reality. Tommy grew into a bright, curious child who loved the ranch with the unselfconscious devotion of someone who'd never known anything else. By the time he was 5, he was following Caleb around, learning to care for animals and mend fences and read the weather in the clouds. He had Alara's stubbornness and Caleb's steady nature, and watching him, Alara sometimes felt overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd built. One evening, sitting on the porch while Tommy played in the yard with a wooden horse Caleb had made, Alara said, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "This. Marrying me, taking on someone else's problems, tying yourself to this place." Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy in the fading light. "I regret that it had to start the way it did. I regret that you were put in a position where you had to choose between impossible options. But regret the outcome? Regret this?" He gestured at the ranch, at their son, at the life they'd made. "Never." "Even when it's hard?" especially when it's hard because hard means it matters. She took his hand and held it, feeling the calluses earned from years of work, and thought about how strange it was that the worst year of her life had led to the best years. She'd lost Thomas and gained Caleb. She'd nearly lost the ranch and ended up securing it completely. She'd faced impossible conditions and met them all. But more than that, she'd learned something about herself, that she was stronger than she'd known, more resilient than she'd believed, more capable of adaptation than she'd imagined. The woman who'd sat in that lawyer's office hearing about the impossible deadline would barely recognize the woman she'd become. That woman had been desperate and alone. This woman was neither. Years passed. Tommy grew into a capable young man who understood the value of the land he'd been born to save. The ranch prospered under Alara and Caleb's joint management, expanding gradually until it was one of the more successful operations in the valley. They hired good people, treated them fairly, and built a reputation for integrity that opened doors. Alara never forgot what it felt like to almost lose everything. That knowledge informed every decision she made, every risk she took, every kindness she showed. She helped other women in impossible situations when she could, offering advice or work, or just the knowledge that someone understood what they were facing. Caleb remained the steady center of her life. Partner, husband, father, friend. The love that had grown between them was nothing like the passion of youth that poets wrote about. It was quieter, deeper, built on shared struggle and mutual respect, and the daily choice to stay and work and build together. It was real in ways that fairy tales never captured. And the ranch, the land that had been the center of so much conflict, became simply home. The place where they raised their son, built their life, and proved that sometimes the best victories are the ones you have to fight for, the ones that cost everything and give back more than you expected. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and Tommy was asleep and the valley lay peaceful under stars that stretched from horizon to horizon, Alara would stand on the porch and look out at the land that was irrevocably, completely, legally hers. She'd think about the impossible year, about the deadline written in dust and desperation, about the choice to marry a man she barely knew, and the slow discovery that sometimes the right choice looks like the wrong one until you're on the other side of it. She'd think about rules that were designed to break women and the satisfaction of bending those rules until they served her instead. She'd think about the town that had watched her struggle and the few people who'd stood by her when it mattered. She'd think about strength that came from having no choice but to be strong, and about how sometimes survival was the most radical act of all. And she'd feel Caleb's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm, and she'd know that she'd done it. Against impossible odds and brutal deadlines and a system designed to ensure she'd fail, she'd done it. She'd survived. She'd fought. She'd won. And in the end, that was enough.